Chapter 1521. Absolutely crushed. 1521. Absolutely crushed. If the person who had launched the sneak attack had been the second in the world, then Goudawi would have at most resented the latter for concealing his abilities, causing him to make an error in his calculations, and leading to the fact that he had still sustained minor injury even after he had used the mystical power of 10 lives. But this person was actually Ling Han. How could it be Ling Han? It had clearly only been the second in the world who had walked ahead of him. Could it be? He was suddenly startled. This guy had come up from another place. Goudawi's expression changed drastically. Why did he do that? Could it be that he deliberately did not want others to know of his whereabouts? What about the second in the world? "You have purposely come to target me?" he asked menacingly. Though it was a question, his tone was very certain. Ling Han pointed at him. "It is about time to completely clear the debts between the two of us. Are you even worthy to say such words to me?" Goudawi scoffed. "In my first life, I was the severing mundane ancestor of the celestial realm. Who do you think you are?" He, too, pointed at Ling Han, his expression filled with condescension. He did not move at the first moment because he wanted to drag things out. It was too disadvantageous to him to start a fight in this place. Ling Han, on the other hand, would definitely be less affected than he was with a strong physique. Previously, he had already lost once to Ling Han, and now he was seriously weakened, and would definitely be less of a match for Ling Han. It was definitely not a spar this time round. Ling Han was aiming for his life. Even if Goudawi was incredibly confident in himself, he still chose a delaying tactic. As long as another person arrived, would Ling Han still dare make a fatal move against him? As long as he managed to get out of this, he could come back to seek his vengeance after cultivating a few more years, or he could ask the Star Sand Saint to make a move. Ling Han had absolute confidence. At the time, he had managed to defeat Goudawi with engraving only level 14 killing formations in his body, and now he had inscribed the number 1 killing formation among level 15 formations, the Blood Crow formation. Even if Goudawi's cultivation level had improved rapidly and greatly, it could not be as great as that. He smiled calmly and did not rush to move either, but rather asked, "How do you know I am not a reincarnated celestial king?" "Ho ho!" Goudawi smirked coldly. Actually, he very much wanted to slap Ling Han, but at this point he could only suppress the urge. He surveyed his surroundings and said, "I am very curious. If you have deliberately lured me here, but with your abilities, you absolutely are not capable of this. This is the treasure trove of the Heavenly River King." At the time, the Heavenly River King had indeed obtained the inheritance of a celestial king, yet suffered the combined attacks of a great many forbidden lands. In the end, he died, but the forbidden lands did not manage to get their hands on this treasure trove, Ling Han explained, appearing to be very generous. Goudawi's breathing suddenly became rapid. His eyes had widened slightly, and the gaze he directed at Ling Han was filled with covetous greed. Ling Han nodded and replied, "You have guessed correctly. This treasure is indeed in my possession, and I conveniently used it to draw you out to settle problem. The cultivation technique of a celestial king." Goudawi's body was trembling. Perhaps Ling Han did not know what the word celestial king represented, but he was extremely clear what they meant. The celestial king was the king of the whole celestial realm. The celestial realm was colossal, and there were many elites. But how many celestial kings were there? As far as he knew, there were only a mere 7 off course. Even though he had been a severing mundane ancestor, he had still only lived in one corner of the celestial realm. He had not traveled the whole celestial realm, so his knowledge was limited. But were the places that a severing mundane ancestor had traveled to not big enough? And even then, only 7 celestial kings had been born. This was an existence at the top of the power pyramid of the celestial realm. He had only obtained a portion of the 9 deaths heaven art, but he was sure that when he returned to the severing mundane tier in the future, there would definitely be no one that could equal him of the same cultivation level, except for those that had similarly cultivated the celestial technique of a celestial king. Only they would be able to match him. Ling Han might possibly have obtained a complete celestial technique of a celestial king. Give it to me. That is mine. A vein popped on Gu Daoi's forehead, his eyes bloodshot. Yours your ass. Ling Han moved, grabbing out at Gu Dao. Gu Dao naturally was long since prepared. 8 ice bodies of 9 lives all flew out, while the divine fetus was glowing with supreme light. 2 rays of light shot out from his eyes, filled with a terrifying destructive ability. This was a mystical power that he had newly cultivated, and could only be used after he had reached the eternal river tier. Previously, he had not fully grasped it, and now he could finally put it to use. You have improved, so how could I have not? Gu Dao called out, his hands forming seals, and shot out another mystical power. It was the blue wolf seal, obtained in his first life in the celestial realm. It was also a mystical power that could barely be used only after reaching the eternal river tier. Ling Han was unafraid and aggressively charged onward. Pung, he shot out a punch, and Gu Daoi's 8th lifetime body exploded. Another punch, and the 5th lifetime body also immediately died. He just simply charged forwards, dealing with each body with a single punch. Gu Dao was astonished. His bodies of 9 lives were stronger even than the present him. So how could they be so fragile? No, no, no. How is it that Ling Han had become so extremely powerful? How could this be? How was this possible? It had been only a few years, and with the aid of his various mystical powers, he had made his abilities 3 to 4 times stronger than before. This was already an impressive achievement, but Ling Han's improvement was not just 10 times. It was possible that he had improved 100 times, or even 1,000 times. It was clear that this guy's cultivation level had only increased a single star. Yet why was it that his battle prowess had soared so much? Could it be? Your skeleton is actually so strong that you can inscribe 2 high-level formation patterns. Realization suddenly dawned on him. Otherwise, it was definitely impossible that Ling Han could increase his battle prowess by so many folds under the condition that there had been practically no change to his cultivation level. You freak. By now, he was really starting to believe that Ling Han was the reincarnation of a celestial king. Otherwise, how could he possibly be this strong? Ling Han charged ahead. After throwing out 9 punches, all 9 bodies of Gu Dao had exploded, and he was heading straight for the original. Gu Dao gritted his teeth. It was an impossible thing for him to flee out of this place. That paw of the Saint King was pressing down on them, so they could only slowly and carefully climb out. But in this kind of situation, could he do that? His only option was to fight to the death and hold on until another person came. He clapped a hand on his chest and channeled 3 breaths of celestial source power at the same time. 2 breaths were not enough at all. Pooh! Multiple cracks immediately appeared on his skin. Blood seeped out, and he had become a completely bloody figure. Previously, 2 breaths of celestial source power had almost caused him to break down. What more when there were 3 breaths now? But if he did not use 3 breaths, he was unable to match Ling Han at all. This was a move of desperation. I, Gu Dao, am a supreme divine fetus, and definitely will not lose to anyone in a battle of equals, he roared. It was unknown whether he was merely shouting or trying to give himself encouragement. Ling Han's expression was indifferent. You have merely cultivated an incomplete 9 deaths heaven art, whereas I have cultivated the indestructible heaven scroll that has been created through combining the strengths of various secret techniques of celestial kings. In the past, I had not found a way to use the indestructible heaven scroll in attack, but things are different now. Comparing celestial techniques with me, are you even worthy of it? His palm descended, and the 10 blood crow formations showed their might simultaneously. Now he was anxious to suppress Gu Dao, fearing that the latter would explode his body, and his empress wife would not be able to make use of it in the beginning. He didn't mind if the empress cultivated at a slower pace, as he also could not bear to have the empress charge and break through enemy lines. But now, the matter concerned his future days of married bliss. "Fuck! You dare destroy what belongs to me," he uttered furiously. At first, Gudawi was stunned, but then realization dawned on him, and he almost fainted in fury. "You fuck actually thought of me as a meal on a platter." But at this time, Ling Han's palm had already fallen. There was a lifelike blood crow spreading its wings in his palm, exuding an incredibly frightening aura. How was he supposed to block that? Chapter 1522. Who did it? Chapter 1522. Who did it? His palm descended and suppressed all the heavens. Gu Dawi blasted out with his fists, and the power of the divine fetus blossomed. He released an enraged roar, stimulating the power of all the stars of the heavens. A silver river stretched out, and 6 heavenly bodies shone brightly, each of them astonishingly huge. There was a silvery divine light covering him densely. He was going to go all out. But what was the point? Ling Han's palm pressed down, and Gudawi was immediately suppressed. He was tossed directly into the Black Tower. In the first place, he was much stronger than Gudawi, and added with the fact that this place would restrict Gudawi, he easily suppressed the latter with a single move. At this time, those that were nearest to the summit still had about 20% of the journey left to make. Ling Han tossed out the second in the world. On a mischievous whim, he pulled down his pants and then climbed out of the treasure trove. He took the same path and returned to the foot of the mountain. "Brat, what did you go off to do?" The large black dog stood in his path. "Looking at the despicable grin on your face, it definitely must be nothing good." "I went to destroy your doghouse." Ling Han was in a good mood and countered all the moves from the large black dog. The large black dog looked at him suspiciously and said, "I say, little Han, this is not good of you. How could you not call Grandpa Dog if you were doing something fun like murder and arson? You see, Grandpa Dog can still keep a lookout for you from the sidelines." Ling Han chuckled coldly. "You're just here to watch the excitement, aren't you? If someone had really come, you definitely would have added fuel to the fire. An absolutely cunning dog that delights in having the world in chaos." You actually hit the nail on the head. I am speechless." The large black dog knew no shame. "I can't be bothered with you." Ling Han ascended the mountain, whistling lazily. Gudawi that had entered into the Black Tower would be completely helpless, and his only option would be to surrender to his fate. "Ling Han, what is this place? How could there possibly be such a huge spatial god tool? Who exactly are you?" Gudawi shouted with all his might inside the Black Tower. His celestial source power was already suppressed by the Black Tower, and he could only stand helplessly now, unable to move even the slightest bit. "What are you shouting so much for? Do you think this is a place for you to shout as you like?" The Azura Demon Emperor appeared. He had always been one to take advantage of those weaker while revering those stronger. By now, Gudawi had lost all power to resist, so he naturally wanted to use his superior position to intimidate him. Gudawi was about to go crazy. A mere sun-moon tear actually dared to rebuke him. Was he trying to cause an uprising? "Pah!" The Azura Demon Emperor immediately threw a slap at him and fiercely said, "What expression of yours is that? What kind of eyes are you looking at me with? Are you looking down on your grandpa Azura? Fuck you! You actually dare oppose my master when you look so weak. You're simply asking for a thrashing." He did not say another word, and simply settled for beating him up first. "Ling Han, you have gone too far. You can kill me, but cannot humiliate me. You actually let your lackey humiliate me. You are too shameless." Gudawi was about to go crazy. He was the honored, severing, mundane ancestor here. Lackey. The Azura Demon Emperor wore an expression of pride. Brat, being able to become master's lackey is a wonderful thing that cannot be attained even if you beg. Do you think just anyone can become master's lackey? Che, my master would not even deign to look at a piece of trash like you. His whole expression was filled with flattery. Master is our sun, and would bring light wherever he shines. Master is the light of guidance that lights up the darkness. Master is the strongest elite that stands at the absolute apex, and everyone in the world can only look up to him with reverence and admiration. Gu Daoi's whole face was twitching. This was the first time he had seen someone curry favor with someone to such a refreshing and refined extent, and he was already dumbfounded. Ling Han grinned internally and blocked off his connection with the Black Tower. From the instant that he tossed Gu Daoi into the Black Tower, this person had already become a thing of the past, and was not worth another glance from him. Gu Daoi's being known as the greatest prodigy of all eternity was only because he had cultivated the incomplete, secret technique of a celestial king. When Ling Han reached the summit, only 31 people had actually arrived. They were all searching around in the treasure trove. But after Ling Han had swept through, that would be equivalent to a plague of locusts having swept through. Would there be anything of the slightest value left behind? The second in the world was sitting on the ground, a stunned expression on his face. His wide fingers were gripping into his hair. A lapse had occurred in his memories. Why was I lying on the ground just now? Oh, right, I have been knocked unconscious. Nothing has been taken from me, but my pants have been taken off. Gask! The second in the world involuntarily pressed his hand on his behind. Could it be that this was a sexual assault? At first, he had not thought anything of it, but with a clench of his heart, he could vaguely feel his behind aching, and he paled in shock. It couldn't have been that he had been raped, right? His eyes swept over the masses. Everyone presently here was a suspect. It just so happened that Ling Han had just climbed up. When he saw the stunned and horrified expression on the second in the world's face, he couldn't help but laugh internally and asked, "Brother Second, what is it? You don't look too good? Who asked you to have run so fast?" The second in the world merely nodded distractedly at Ling Han. His eyes were wide open and swept over every single one of the 31 people here. There was Ren Feiyun, there was Qi Tian, and there were also the other big shots. Fuck, there were too many people, and he could not identify who it was. Pooh! Ling Han spluttered. When the large black dog saw this, he immediately stood on his hind legs and said, "Brat, does this have anything to do with you? Judging from the look of that bear, he looks like he has been raped. So could it be Gasp?" The large black dog was scared into taking a few steps back. "I never thought that you are that kind of person. Grandpa Dog is warning you. If you dare have any ideas about me, I will tear a chunk off of your behind." Ling Han did not pay him any attention. It had only been a mischievous whim of his that caused him to play a trick on the second in the world. He had never thought that the effects would be so awesome that the second in the world would be so alarmed and search everywhere for whoever raped him. After a thorough search, it was natural that everyone did not gain anything. They defiantly searched again. Would there be something like a treasure trove hidden within the treasure trove? They wanted nothing more than to flatten the whole mountain and search deep underground. But there was still nothing valuable to be found. No one cared about why Gu Daoi had disappeared. Previously, when they had entered, everyone was asterisk, 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 asterisk looking for treasure. So who would be concerned that there was one less person? Gu Daoi might have seen that there was nothing to be gained, and had thus long since left. Everyone left begrudgingly, but the moment they exited the world of the chest, they saw a golden pathway spread out from an endless distance away. Then they saw a person walk towards them. He was clearly merely strolling slowly, but in the blink of an eye he had already arrived in front of them. The torrential rain saint. When they saw him, they all exclaimed in shock. Some of them immediately knelt, and those that did not kneel still looked extremely respectful. Saints stood at the apex of cultivation and would be respected universally. The torrential rain saint raised his head slightly. He looked at the 3 corpses of the Phoenix Kings, and an involuntary expression of surprise appeared on his face. A treasure had appeared in this place, and the news had definitely also reached his ears. However, he was not tempted. When one had reached the height that he had already blended to a certain extent with heaven's will. If this was capable of bringing him gains or harm, he would definitely be prompted by a sudden impulse and have sensed it. Because he had not sensed anything at all, he naturally did not move out. The other saints were the same as well. However, when the chest had been opened, golden light surged into the skies, and it could be seen even from the distant Wood-Figure planet. This caused the 10 saints to feel slightly curious. Thus he came to take a look. He was sure that no matter what happened, he would be able to easily deal with it. Yet when he saw the 3 corpses of the Phoenix Kings, he was stunned. How was he supposed to deal with this? Chapter 1523, Saints All Arrive. Chapter 1523, 10 Saints All Arrive. All of you stay here. Do not move without permission, the torrential rain saint commanded darkly. We obey, everyone answered solemnly. The torrential rain saint stepped once more on the golden path and returned to Wood-Figure planet. However, though saints could rip a tear into space, they could not do so to the extent that the other end of the world seemed very close. A certain amount of time was still required. After about an hour later, the 10 saints were seen coming together, arriving on multiple golden paths. When everyone saw this, they were all unfathomably stunned. It had actually alerted the 10 saints. These were the 10 saints. The Star Sand Saint walked towards the Phoenix King's corpses, causing Ling Han to feel slightly anxious. His wife, Fenger, was inside, accepting her inheritance, and she could absolutely not be interrupted. He decided internally that if the Star Sand Saint really would do something, he would stop him even if it meant he had to use the blood essence of the Saint King. Thankfully, the Star Sand Saint soon stopped and showed a hint of seriousness in his expression. He had absolutely zero confidence that he could suppress these 3 corpses, even if these 3 Phoenix Kings were already dead, and even if he was an honored and noble great saint. Master! The 9 saints all approached. The Star Sand Saint's expression was filled with seriousness, and he stated, "These are the bodies of Saint Kings." Hiss! All the 9 saints inhaled sharply. With their insight, they naturally could tell that those were not monsters that had never been seen before, but rather 3 true phoenixes that were presently wrapped around one another. True phoenixes definitely were of saint level, but to have reached Saint King level, it was hard to imagine. The 3 Phoenix Kings were pulling a chariot, so how valuable could the treasure they were bearing be? The bitter T-Saint said. The 10 saints exchanged looks. If they could obtain the treasures left behind by a Saint King, then small saints could possibly become medium saints, and a great saint would have hopes of advancing another step further and attain a supreme apex. Let's go and take a look. The chest had been left open, and they naturally could see the scene of chaos that lay within. They also heard from the mouths of the students that there was indeed a small world inside. The saints entered, and even if the others had already entered once before, they involuntarily followed and entered again. To have alerted even the saints, the importance of this object was beyond their expectations. They had not found any treasures, but who knew, maybe the saints could. When Ling Han entered into the world inside the chest as well, he saw that the 10 saints had already arrived at the summit of the main peak. Obviously, the intimidation of the massive paw had no effect on these saints, or rather it was too far, and so posed no threat at all. The Star Sand Saint moved and began to put away this massive paw. Though a great saint was far from the level of a Saint King, this was after all only a paw and not a complete corpse. Furthermore, the 3 Phoenix Kings outside were already wrapped around each other and their bloodline connected. So how could a broken paw compare? The Star Sand Saint used all his might and dispelled the terrifying saintly might within the paw. The others could clearly sense that the destructive ability of the mountain winds on the main peak was being weakened at an incredibly fast pace. "Take in!" the Star Sand Saint shouted again, and this massive paw disappeared. Ling Han couldn't help but feel envious. This was the paw of a Saint King here. If he could cook it into a stew, there would definitely be innumerable benefits to be gained. But who would dare take something from the possession of a great saint? Once the giant paw vanished, there was naturally not the slightest bit of threat left here. Everyone set out on a massive sweep. Even the 10 saints were turning over mountains and seas. Yet there was not the slightest bit to obtain. Actually, it could not be said that there was nothing. The Saint King's paw itself was an astonishing treasure, and refining the saintly origin power from within could possibly be beneficial even for the great saint. "Where is Gu Dawi?" The Star Sand Saint suddenly paused. This last disciple of his had come here early on. At first, he thought that he would be in the world inside the chest, but he did not sense Gu Dawi at all. Where was he? Where had he gone? The 9 saints all hurriedly spread out their divine sense in search. Gu Dawi was their master's personal disciple, and also bore the high hopes of their master. In the future, he would be inheriting his legacy. But no matter how much they searched, they did not discover the slightest trace of Gu Dawi. The Star Sand Saint's expression was dark, and he had those who had come in earliest all relate their experience. And when the second in the world related his own experiences, the Star Sand Saint's expression involuntarily moved slightly. Suddenly, a frightening gust of wind began to blow around the peaks, its might not the slightest bit inferior to the mountain winds that had been created by the effects of massive paw previously. The Star Sand Saint was certain that the mysterious person that had knocked the second in the world unconscious was connected to the disappearance of his disciple. It was not that he had not suspected the second in the world, but he definitely did not think that the second in the world had the ability to take Gu Dawi down under the condition of not alerting the other 7 in that previously unusual situation. If a supreme divine fetus was this weak, how could he have possibly taken him in as a personal disciple? This person. Who exactly was it? All the big shots among the students had that kind of ability, but everyone had said that Gu Dawi was the second to enter into this place. If there was anyone faster than him, that would definitely be one that was extremely strong in physique. There was not one person among the big shots that fitted this condition. In terms of physique, it was Gu Dawi who was superior instead. The Star Sand Saint cast his eyes on Ling Han. Though this was only a new student, he had managed to defeat Gu Dawi previously. Furthermore, his physique was astonishing, so he possessed an incredible advantage in this place. Ling Han. The great saint suddenly spoke up in direct confrontation, his voice sounding like thunder. "Was it you who apprehended Gu Dawi?" Ling Han gave an "ah," his face filled with confusion. He looked absolutely baffled. When the large black dog saw this, he couldn't help but give him a thumbs up internally. He really had the elegant demeanor of Grandpa Dog. When the news about Gu Dawi's disappearance spread out, he did not even have to think a second time. He was immediately certain that it was Ling Han who was behind it. You quietly ascended the mountain, then quietly descended again. Then you climbed up using a different path. Didn't this obviously show that you have done something secretly before? Little guy, you still want to play tricks in front of your Grandpa Dog? You're still too naive. The Star Sand Saint's abilities were millions of times greater than the large black dog's. But in terms of familiarity with Ling Han, he was far from being able to compare to the large black dog. In his eyes, Ling Han's expression of complete confusion and lack of understanding definitely did not look like it was an act. Was this unrelated to him? The Star Sand Saint pondered. But aside from Ling Han, whose physique would be so strong that he could reach the summit ahead of the second in the world and Gu Dawi, it can't possibly be Ling Han. The second in the world was very loyal, He explained that Ling Han had appeared at a time that was far later than the others. But when the Star Sand Saint heard this, a hint of suspicion was seen in his expression. With Ling Han's physique, not being the first to reach the summit was one thing, yet he was actually later than a great many others? This was illogical. Ling Han internally berated the second in the world for ruining things. If you don't say anything, no one will take you as a mute. If he had known this would happen, he should have tossed him into the Black Tower and imprisoned him for 8 to 10 years. The Star Sand Saint looked at Ling Han and calmly asked, "With your physique being so strong, why did you appear so late?" Ling Han's heartbeat was even, and he responded, "In reply to the saint, I went to the other peaks prior to this, and so went here at a later time." The Star Sand Saint hummed. This indeed was a very good reason, but should he really believe it? He released his divine sense and searched Ling Han thoroughly. After a while he commanded, "Take out the spatial spirit tool that you possess." "Yes." Ling Han drew out a ring and respectfully handed it over. Thankfully, he had long made his own preparations. This ring was used to cover for the Black Tower. Elites like them would definitely possess spatial spirit tools, right? The Star Sand Saint grabbed out an empty air and retrieved the ring. Then his divine sense swept over it. There were some true origin stones inside, as well as some alchemical pills and herbs, but there was definitely no dead body, nor any trace of a corpse. Was it really not this boy? Chapter 1524, New 9 Deaths, Have an AR. Chapter 1524, New 9 Deaths, Have an AR. The Star Sand Saint threw the ring back to Ling Han. With his command, everyone left the world within the chest. "Send someone to stand guard here. The 3 Phoenix King corpses seem to be undergoing some kind of change. The moment there is any activity, immediately send someone to inform me," the Star Sand Saint commanded. "Yes!" The 9 saints all affirmed their adherence to his command loudly. The 10 saints stretched out their golden paths and had already returned to Woodfigure Planet. Naturally, there was someone staying behind to stand guard here, taking note and observing any change to the 3 Phoenix King corpses. Even the saints had left, so there was naturally no reason for the others to stay behind any longer. They all made their way back. Though everyone had not managed to gain anything, it was not a wasted trip. They had seen the remains of Saint Kings. Wasn't that a valuable experience in itself? Meanwhile, Ling Han did not leave. The Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden was a massive weakness by now. When she had completely accepted her inheritance, he would move at the first instant and knock unconscious everyone here. Then, he would take her from here before the saints arrived. He made a long detour, then directly entered into the Black Tower and waited patiently. And in the outside world, or to be more exact, in the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy, a huge matter happened. Gu Dawi had disappeared. The Star Sand Saint flew into a thunderous rage. He even sent out the 9 saints to search for the whereabouts of Gu Dawi. He had mysteriously vanished when he journeyed out of Woodfigure Planet. This was something that the great saint could not accept. If he was still alive, he had to be found. If he was dead, then he wanted to see his dead body for himself. Yet when the news of this spread out, it was incredibly encouraging news to the other students. If Gu Dawi had died, didn't that mean that he was not the fated person, and the others still had hope of becoming a saint? Indeed, just like Ling Han said, effort might not necessarily lead to success, but no effort meant absolute failure. They had stayed behind in the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy. If they managed to gain the favor of the Star Sand Saint, that would mean that they could replace Gu Dawi and become a new candidate for a saint. These people naturally wanted nothing more than for Gu Dawi to have died. Only those like Long Xiangyue and the second in the world had firm belief in themselves. They believed that they were inferior to none. Aside from the 3 Phoenix King corpses that were still there, everything seemed to have returned to normal. Gu had not been found in the end, but the Star Sand Saint did not take any new disciple, either. Then a more explosive piece of news spread out. The Star Sand Saint had the intention to nurture his own son to inherit the position of saint from him. At first, this was practically an impossible thing. Though saints had exceptional ways, they would be able to pull others into the eternal river tier at most. They had no way to increase the cultivation level of others further than that. The barrier into saint level had to be breached with one's own effort. But when the Star Sand Saint had taken that paw of the Saint King, he gained that slight sliver of a chance. He had extracted a drop of blood essence from a Saint King from within it, dispelled the murderous aura inside, used it to reforge his son's body, and increased his martial arts' natural talent from the very source. The blood essence of a Saint King was too precious and too powerful. Since he could nurture his own son, what was the point of letting his own fertile water flow into the fields of others? In the blink of an eye, 3 years had passed. Inside the Black Tower, the Empress ended her isolation and smilingly stood in front of Ling Han. Finished. Ling Han asked in pleasant surprise. The Empress in front of him did not seem to have advanced much in her cultivation level, but the feeling she gave off was different. She seemed to have an additional, otherworldly air of divinity. She was even more charming than before, and had also become stronger many times over. The Empress smiled beautifully and replied, "I have already cultivated the divine fetus and obtained the mystical power of 10 lives. I have also improved further." Her figure swayed slightly, and a person walked out from within her body. This new person looked exactly like her, but her bearing was slightly different. However, she was still very strong. Consecutively, it was a second person, a third, and there were 9 in all. Added with herself, there were 10 of them in total. Ling Han was a little dumbfounded. He had 10 Empress wives. One was enough to completely captivate him out of his wits. How was he supposed to handle 10 of them? Gu Dawi could only summon his bodies of 9 lives, and I previously could also only form 9 doppelgangers, and their abilities would still be weakened. Empress Luan Xing was slightly excited. But now, every one of my doppelgangers is as strong as I am. Furthermore, no matter how far my doppelgangers are from me, they are connected with my will, and communication between us will not be affected by time and space. If a doppelganger dies, I will still be able to reform it. What is more amazing is that the 10 of us can cultivate at the same time, and the abilities of the doppelgangers will flow into the main body, and their battle prowess will only be affected by the main body. Ling Han experienced a huge shock. This was truly extremely impressive. As expected of the technique of a celestial king. Previously, whether it was the Empress or Gu Dawi, they had only cultivated a superficial part, and now the Empress had truly grasped some profound secrets of a celestial king technique. This definitely was not the true 9 deaths heaven art, either. Still, it was already very powerful. Unless the Empress herself pointed it out, Ling Han had completely no way to distinguish which was her main body, and as long as the main body was not dead, the doppelgangers could grow and multiply without end. In battle, this was really too powerful. Furthermore, the 10 of them could cultivate at the same time, and all their gains would be supplied to the main body, which was equivalent to being 10 times faster than others. More importantly, when others ingested alchemical pills, they would slowly become immune or even accumulate alchemic poison. But the Empress could use her 10 bodies to ingest them in turns. After a whole round, the alchemic poison and immunity would have more or less disappeared. How could a celestial king technique not be awesome? Ling Han leaped up and embraced the Empress. Whirling her around a few times, he asked, "Then you wouldn't need too much time to enter into saint level, right?" The Empress smiled confidently. "Within 100 years. Ling Han chuckled. "That was only 100 years. I will bear it." Because the heavenly phoenix divine maiden was still undergoing her inheritance, they continued to stay inside the Black Tower. Everyone had previously drank a soup of saintly medicine, and by now the medicinal effects had been more or less digested. Thus, Ling Han drew out a second saintly medicine and began to cook again. This time, the Empress had devoured a large portion of the saintly medicine because she had 10 bodies to help her with the digestion, which was not the slightest bit inferior to Ling Han. A number of days later, Ling Han just barely reached the late stage of the low extreme, and the Empress had advanced into the peak stage of the low extreme. She was merely one step away from breaking through. Her current cultivation rate was really too fast. With 10 of her cultivating at the same time and ingesting alchemical pills together, added with the fact that she was a divine fetus as well. Even Ling Han could only watch her with shock from behind, completely dumbfounded. Ling Han was naturally not going to feel envious. He wanted nothing more than for the Empress to advance her cultivation rate even faster. The heavenly phoenix divine maiden was still the same, so Ling Han returned to Wood Figure Planet to seek out Lin Yuqi. Of course, the Empress also left behind one of her doppelgangers to stand guard. If anything unusual happened, she could find out at the first instant and rush back with Ling Han. Though a saint's speed was faster, the person that had to inform the saint had to make a trip to Wood Figure Planet first. Ling Han only had to be faster than this person who was bringing the information back. Obviously, this was not a hard thing to do. The Treasure Forest Pavilion had opened a branch here, but this was not the Long Light Galaxy. The Treasure Forest Pavilion did not have the slightest advantage in this place. Their doors were desolate and looked as if they were about to close down very soon. Ling Han entered and exclaimed, "Where is your shopkeeper? There's big business to be done." He slightly released the aura of an eternal river tear, and those shop assistants immediately became incomparably respectful. They hurriedly requested him to wait for a while as they raced to the backyard to inform the shopkeeper. Soon after, with a tinkle and an air of fragrance, a beautiful woman approached him with graceful steps and a seductive swing of her hips. She exuded a bewitching air from her very bones, and the eyes of the younger shop assistants blazed with fire at the sight of her. Chapter 1525 Rex. Chapter 1525 Rex. Some women were noble in their beauty, while others were aloof in their beauty. There were also some that were incredibly seductive in their beauty. It was clear that Lin Yuqi belonged to the last of these categories. Her beauty was no match for that of the Empress, but she was definitely the type of beauty who would cause men to want to take off their pants at first sight. "Oh, isn't this little brother Han?" Lin Yuqi's habit of teasing others hadn't changed a single bit. A seductive glimmer instantly appeared in her eyes upon seeing Ling Han, and she was already starting to act flirtingly. The Empress smiled faintly, her majestic gaze immediately sweeping over. As sister, like a mouse that had seen a cat, Lin Yuqi instantly became obedient. In fact, she even lowered her head and started fiddling with the corner of her sleeves. The domineering nature of this Empress was still fresh in her mind, and thus she didn't dare to act out of line at all. Ling Han smiled and said, "It seems like business hasn't been good lately." "Sai, don't mention it. It's much worse than just not good. In fact, our shop has been completely deserted." There was a troubled look on Lin Yuqi's face, and she said in exaggeration, "I'm so poor right now that I almost have to sell my body for a living." If the Empress hadn't been present, she would have definitely made eyes at Ling Han already. She would then ask if he was interested in becoming her sugar daddy. Now, however, she could only bite her tongue. This made her feel slightly stifled. A leopard couldn't change its spots. Even if she forced herself, she still couldn't act seriously. "Then let me introduce you to a business," Ling Han said. Lin Yuqi looked at him with a suspicious expression before asking, "You really want to introduce me to a brothel?" "Fuck." Ling Han shook his head before retrieving some godly metal and saying, "I want you to help me sell this godly metal. Moreover, I also want to buy some low-level godly metal myself. I'm happy with anything from level 11 to level 13. He had far too much level 14 godly metal, and thus he could sell the majority of it and use what he earned to purchase level 11 to level 13 godly metal. This godly metal could then be used to level up his divine demon sword. Gasp! Level 14 godly metal. Lin Yuqi dashed over and essentially snatched the godly metal from Ling Han's hands. Oh my word! How many people did you rob? You actually managed to obtain this much high-level godly metal? It's just that it's a little strange. This godly metal seems to look like. There was a suspicion in her mind, yet she didn't dare to believe it. Ling Han couldn't help but smile and say, "Look like tiles." Indeed, he had removed these pieces of godly metal from those stairs. They didn't just look like tiles, but were legitimately tiles. Lin Yuqi nodded in reply. However, she merely thought that Ling Han was joking. This was level 14 godly metal. Who would use it as simple floor tiles? How extravagant would one need to be? With a strange expression, she asked, "This is a pharmacy, yet you want me to sell godly metal. Can you not?" Ling Han asked. Lin Yuqi mulled over this for a moment. This was level 14 godly metal, so there were definitely few customers who could afford it. However, it could definitely attract many visitors who wanted to lay their eyes on it. That being the case, wouldn't her pharmacy become bustling with people? She immediately nodded and said, "I can." She then made eyes at him and said, "You've helped me so much. Perhaps you want me to repay you with my body?" Ling Han ignored her, saying, "I don't want even a single true origin stone. All I want you to do is exchange it for level 11 to level 13 godly metal. Also, take this ring. There's more godly metal inside here. I'm fairly sure that it's enough to purchase the godly metal that I want." Ling Han handed her a spatial ring. Lin Yuqi was astonished. Just the few slabs of level 14 godly metal that he had handed her were already indescribably expensive. Yet he actually had more? She used her divine sense to inspect the spatial ring, and she almost fainted because of what she saw. Good heavens! There's a small mountain of godly metal inside. Although she hadn't inspected each piece carefully, she could say with absolute certainty that they were all high-level, godly metal. "Aren't you afraid of me stealing them?" As if reading her thoughts, Ling Han immediately unleashed his aura. "Eternal River Tear." Lin Yuqi was astounded. Just then, she hadn't been able to detect Ling Han's cultivation level. However, if Ling Han actively unleashed his aura, she would easily be able to determine his cultivation level. After all, the Treasure Forest Pavilion also had many elites at the Eternal River Tier. However, how many years had it been? Yet, Ling Han had already advanced from the Sun Moon Tier to the Eternal River Tier. This was simply unfathomable. At this rate, wouldn't he advance to become a saint soon? Who dared to steal a saint's belongings? Lin Yuqi had indeed thought about taking the godly metal and fleeing back to Cloud Apex Planet. However, this thought had only lingered in her mind for a split second. What a joke! How could she offend such a freak? Ling Han waved his hand and said, "I'll return in a few years." He then wrapped his arm around Empress Luanxing's waist and took his leave. This brat is truly going to defy the heavens. Lin Yuqi shook her head and remarked, "Perhaps he'll already be a saint the next time that we meet." Ling Han and Empress Luanxing quickly arrived back where the heavenly phoenix divine maiden was. How could Ling Han leave his beautiful wife alone for too long? In any case, there was no better place to cultivate than the Black Tower, no? Moreover, Ding Ping and Jiao could simply return to the academy from time to collect their cultivation resources and also gather some information. Time flew by, and it wasn't long before 9 years had already passed. One day, scorching flames suddenly burst from the corpses of the 3 Phoenix Kings. It was as if they were going to rise from the ashes and obtain a new life. Ling Han immediately rushed over upon detecting this. Yet a small starship had already soared into the sky and started flying toward Wood Figure Planet. Ling Han pondered for a moment and decided to ignore this starship. Instead, he channeled a cultivation technique that changed his physique as well as his appearance. He then charged toward the group of cultivators that were still guarding this area. Those who remained as guards here naturally wouldn't be powerful elites. Thus, they were all knocked unconscious by Ling Han before they even had time to react. If a saint wanted to come here from Wood Figure Planet, they would be able to do so in just a short moment. However, that starship would need at least 3 days to arrive at Wood Figure Planet. Thus, Ling Han still had 3 days to act. He gazed at the corpses of the 3 Phoenix Kings and determined that they were most likely consuming the very last of their power. Their corpses had become transparent, and he could see the heavenly phoenix divine maiden's seemingly weightless body among them. Her body was curled into a ball, with her arms wrapped around her knees. Meanwhile, her silky hair was seemingly soaring toward the sky. "Wife, you've got to hurry up," Ling Han murmured. "Otherwise, we'll have no option but to flee from this galaxy if we're discovered by some saint. If a saint witnessed her current state, they would be able to easily link her to the treasures of this place. Moreover, her relationship with Ling Han was no secret. Thus, all of them would be indicted along with her." 2 days passed, and the flames of the Phoenix Kings also burned to an extreme before suddenly dying down. However, a new burst of flame immediately replaced it as the heavenly phoenix, divine maiden, proudly rose into the sky. A pair of wings that measured tens of thousands of meters in length was unfurled behind her. The wingspan was unchanged, yet the divine patterns that decorated the wings were numerous times more complex than before. This wasn't an elevation in cultivation level, but rather an elevation in essence and quality. This was analogous to the Star Sand Saint using a drop of his Saint King blood essence to elevate the natural talent and physique of his son. The heavenly phoenix divine maiden had also undergone a similar transformation, though the benefits that she had received were countless times more impressive than what the Star Sand Saint's son had received. After all, the Star Sand Saint hadn't even dared to touch the corpses of the 3 Phoenix Kings. "Wife!" Ling Han shouted. The heavenly phoenix divine maiden immediately opened her eyes before flapping her wings and flying into Ling Han's embrace. She wore a look of excitement as she retracted her wings. This was only natural as she hadn't seen Ling Han in many years. "Let's go," Ling Han said as he retrieved the cloud-piercing shuttle. They all jumped aboard, and the cloud-piercing shuttle immediately soared into the sky. After taking some detours, they started to return to Wood Figure Planet from a completely different direction. It was also at this moment that a thick golden path unfurled from Wood Figure Planet. This was the sign of a saint traveling over. Chapter 1526, New Shopkeeper. Chapter 1526, New Shopkeeper. The saint that had set off was the Dipankara saint. He arrived in no time, and he quickly returned with the guards who had been knocked unconscious. However, these guards were unable to recall whom they were knocked unconscious by, regardless of how hard they racked their brains. The Star Sand Saint was furious upon learning of this. The mysterious culprit was most likely the same person who was responsible for Gu Daoi's disappearance. Yet they had actually dared to lay a trap there. How incredibly audacious! This was a direct provocation to his might. However, what did it matter that he was furious? There were no clues for him to chase, so what more could he do? Ling Han safely returned to the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy. He then headed to the Treasure Forest Pavilion to check how much godly metal Linyuchi had obtained for him. However, Ling Han was given a fright when he arrived before the pharmacy. It was bustling with people. The last time he had come, it had been desolate and quiet. Now, however, there was an endless stream of people entering and leaving the pharmacy. It was as if they wanted to burst the pharmacy apart. "Brother Qian, are you for real? I want to forge a treasured saber. So why are you taking me to a pharmacy?" "Hee, you'll know once we go inside." 2 people in front of Ling Han were about to head into the pharmacy. However, One of them was wearing a confused expression as they looked at the sign of the Treasure Forest Pavilion. A pharmacy selling weapons? How strange! Ling Han entered the pharmacy behind the two people. Upon entering, he discovered that only a small portion of people was actually purchasing medicines. Most people were gazing around as if waiting for something to happen. It wasn't long before a maid in an azure dress appeared, a tray in her hand. There was an item on this tray, yet it was hidden by a red cloth. Let us begin the auction for today's godly metal. The maid removed the red cloth, revealing the dazzling piece of metal that rested beneath it. Gasp! This is a level 14 godly metal, the ghost-patterned gold. It can be forged into a level 14 weapon, and after being nurtured for a long time, it can become a level 14 god tool. Its power is on par with elites at the medium extreme of the Eternal River tier. I've always heard that this pharmacy auctions a piece of high-level godly metal every 3 days. I hadn't believed it before, but I have no option but to believe it now. This is truly astonishing. Indeed, a pharmacy is actually selling godly metal. How strange is this? Aren't they stealing business from actual weapons shops? Everyone was engaged in a spirited discussion. However, they would still place a bid if they thought the price was right. After all, what did it matter where they purchased their godly metal from? Everything would be fine as long as the godly metal was real. Bids were placed one after another, and the piece of level 14 godly metal was eventually sold to a very happy customer. The customer excitedly handed over his payment before immediately stowing the godly metal away. He then sprinted away from the pharmacy, afraid that he would be ambushed and robbed. Although the auction had already concluded, many people still lingered around. They had come here anyway, so they might as well purchase some goods. Even if only 1% of the people purchased goods, this would still be a huge amount of transactions. After all, there were far too many people here. Ling Han nodded upon seeing this. He then approached a worker and said, "Where's the shopkeeper? I have some matters to discuss with them." "Who are you? Do you think any random person can meet our shopkeeper?" The worker was unexpectedly arrogant, and his attitude was the complete opposite of what Ling Han had experienced the previous time he had come here. Moreover, the workers here were all different from before. Ling Han didn't recognize a single one of them. Business was booming right now, so Ling Han could understand the overconfidence of these workers. However, their arrogance and haughty attitude were taking things a step too far. Ling Han's expression became cold, and wisps of heavens might started to emanate from his body. The worker almost wet his pants in fright. "Don't make me repeat myself again. Call your shopkeeper over." The worker hurriedly nodded and replied, "Yes, yes, right away." His entire body was trembling. After waiting for a moment, Ling Han saw the worker reappear. "Sir, I'm extremely sorry. The shopkeeper is busy at the moment, so he has no time to entertain guests." Ling Han's gaze became intense, and it was as if he were about to explode with fury. However, he forcefully suppressed his anger and said, "Tell him that Ling Han has come." The worker hesitated for a moment. He had been told to ignore this customer and directly shoo them out of the pharmacy. However, the question was, did he dare to shoo this customer away? Moreover, did he have the ability to shoo this customer away? Thus, he had no option but to turn around and report to the shopkeeper again. He returned after a moment, saying, "Mr. Ling, the shopkeeper has invited you for a discussion." He led Ling Han to the backyard of the pharmacy. There was indeed a person standing in the backyard, but this person wasn't Lin Yuqi. Instead, it was a middle-aged man. He looked like a large mountain, and there was a powerful aura radiating from his body. He was at the medium extreme of the Eternal River tier. "Where's Lin Yuqi?" Ling Han knew that something wasn't right, and he asked, "Where's Lin Yuqi?" The middle-aged man waved the worker away before calmly saying, "I'm sure Gangyang, the new shopkeeper of this pharmacy." Ling Han frowned and said, I handed Lin Yuqi a large amount of godly metal to help sell for me. Ahem. Sure, Gangyang coughed loudly and said, Lin Yuqi has already been transferred back to the headquarters. I don't know what kind of deal you made with her, and I can't take your word for it, either. Fuck. He's trying to renege on the deal. This person actually dares to steal my belongings. How courageous! Ling Han humphed and said, Are you trying to openly steal my belongings? Shi Gangyang's expression instantly darkened. Young man, your ability to enter the Star San Martial Arts Academy is a reflection of your cultivation talent. However, having talent is one matter, and having trust is another matter. One has to abide by the principle of trust when dealing with others. Yet, you actually dare to falsely accuse the Treasure Forest Pavilion? How audacious! He was aware that Ling Han was at the Eternal River tier. However, he was still completely unafraid. After all, just how powerful was the Treasure Forest Pavilion? They also had numerous Eternal River tier elites. Moreover, he was an elite at the medium extreme of the Eternal River tier, while Ling Han was only at the low extreme. As such, could he not suppress Ling Han? Ling Han tapped his fingers and said, I'll give you 2 options. 1. Allow Lin Yuqi to speak with me. 2. I'll beat you until you become obedient, and then we can discuss this again. Ha ha ha. Shi Gangyang roared with laughter upon hearing this. Young man, you're far too arrogant. He knew who Ling Han was. Back then, he had even helped Lin Yuqi's branch family win first place in their clan competition. News of this had spread far and wide, and the other 3 families had all heard about it as well. However, none of them had taken it to heart. After all, who would care about a measly heavenly body tier cultivator? Thus, he had been given a fright upon learning that Ling Han had already advanced to the Eternal River tier. However, before the small mountain of level 14 godly metal, how could he suppress his greed? To tell you the truth, so what if those godly metals are yours? It's your word against mine, so who would believe you? However, seeing that you've also made some contributions, here, this is your commission. Sure, Gangyang tossed out a spatial ring. Pa! The spatial ring landed on the ground and started to spin around. Meanwhile, there was a look of disdain on Shi Gangyang's face. Apart from saints, the Treasure Forest Pavilion wasn't afraid of anyone else. Could Ling Han become a saint? The answer was clearly no. This was because he hadn't become the Star San Saint's disciple. Moreover, he had only ranked 2nd among the new students during the initial recruitment. The honor of 1st rank had gone to Gu Dawi. However, after Gu Dawi's disappearance, the Star San Saint still hadn't taken Ling Han as his disciple. This was a clear sign that the great saint didn't believe in Ling Han's ability to become a saint. Even a great saint didn't believe in his abilities, so his fate was as good as sealed. Regardless of how powerful Ling Han became, he would still only be an Eternal River tier elite. However, how many Eternal River tier elites did the 4 clans of the Treasure Forest Pavilion have? A frightening number. The spatial ring finally fell to the ground after spinning for a few more revolutions. It lay there silently just like that. There are 100,000 true origin stones inside. That's already quite a large sum. Shi Gangyang said with a sneer, Take it and P*SS off. Otherwise, you won't even get a single true origin stone. Chapter 1527, You Dare to Screw with Me? Chapter 1527, You Dare to Screw with Me. 100,000 true origin stones. Eternal River tier elites could easily earn this amount if they opened their mouth. After all, Eternal River tier cultivators could be regarded as elites no matter where they went. However, what did this matter? They were worth nothing in Shi Gangyang's eyes. I'm openly screwing with you, but what can you do? Shi Gangyang crossed his arms before his chest, a smug look on his face. Ling Han had only just advanced to the Eternal River tier, and he was more so as foolish and naive as a child. He had actually given Lin Yuqi all of his godly metal in one go. If he didn't cheat him, whom else would he cheat? Why aren't you picking it up? Are you unhappy with the amount? Shi Gangyang continued to humiliate Ling Han, saying, I'm already being incredibly generous by giving you this amount. Otherwise, you might not even receive a single true origin stone. Hurry up, take it, and P** us off. Ling Han chuckled and said, It's been a long time since I felt such a strong urge to beat someone. Congratulations, you fueled my urge to become violent again. Huh, you want to get physical. Shi Gangyang shook his head upon hearing this. Young people were truly too reckless. Weren't they aware of their own limitations? Fighting against him, that would simply be seeking humiliation. In any case, he could teach this brat a lesson in life. In fact, he was actually a little jealous of Ling Han. He had only reached the eternal river tier after cultivating for tens of millions of years. Yet Ling Han? He was brimming with vitality, and he was much like a scathing furnace. It was clear that he was extremely young. Ling Han's lifespan would be hundreds of millions of years longer than his. Ling Han waved his fists and said, You're not worthy of becoming my opponent. I'm simply going to pummel you. You're but a measly cultivator at the low, extreme Aya. Shi Gangyang was still expressing his disdain, yet Ling Han had already charged forward and struck out with his hand. Heavenly bodies appeared, and there was an expanse of dazzling light within his silver river. Although there were only 80 or so heavenly bodies, each of them was hundreds of times larger than ordinary heavenly bodies. Shi Gangyang instantly felt a formidable pressure bearing down upon him. A burst of wind swept over, causing waves of pain to ripple across his skin. This is a powerful enemy. I can't underestimate him. He roared loudly before also unleashing his silver river. There were at least 700 heavenly bodies within this silver river, and this signified that he had already reached the late stage of the medium extreme. He had an advantage of 4 stars over Ling Han. You're seeking death, he roared. He immediately counterattacked, spreading his hand and grabbing at Ling Han's throat. He was going to defeat Ling Han in the most humiliating way possible. He was going to leave Ling Han with a painful and unforgettable memory. Boom! Ling Han's hand arrived and easily obliterated Shi Gangyang's attack. Right now, he could even challenge elites at the consummate level of the Eternal River tier. Thus, how could someone at the medium extreme of the Eternal River tier rival him? What? Shi Gangyang cried in astonishment. He almost wet himself in fright. He's only at the low extreme, so how can he be this powerful? Ling Han tightened his hand already wrapped around Shi Gangyang's neck. Shi Gangyang's body instantly became limp under the power of his origin power. He couldn't move even a single finger. He was genuinely transfixed with terror. All he could do was stare at Ling Han in shock and disbelief. In fact, his eyes were almost about to pop out of their sockets. Open your mouth, Ling Han ordered coldly. Shi Gangyang shook his head with great difficulty. At the same time, he kept his mouth tightly shut. It was clear that Ling Han wasn't going to do anything good. Ling Han made a grabbing motion and retrieved the spatial ring from the ground. He then used his divine sense to activate it, instantly retrieving the mountain of true origin stones that was contained within it. He grabbed a piece and forced it into Shi Gangyang's mouth. What are you doing? Shi Gangyang shouted using his divine sense. He was both astonished and terrified. Open your mouth. Ling Han mercilessly slapped him, causing him to open his mouth. He then immediately stuffed the true origin stone inside. This true origin stone was so large that it caused Shi Gangyang's mouth to distort. Meanwhile, Ling Han grabbed another true origin stone and forcefully stuffed it inside his mouth. Shi Gangyang couldn't help but tremble, and his eyes were almost about to pop out. This was far too painful. He was at the Eternal River tier, so he could easily obliterate even the toughest true origin stones if he attacked them with his full power. However, he didn't possess a powerful physique, and his origin power was more so being restricted at this moment. Failing to form a protective barrier, how could his physique rival the toughness of true origin stones? His throat was immediately wounded after being forced to swallow 2 true origin stones. Blood sprayed from his mouth, and he felt an overwhelming pain shoot through his body. However, Ling Han was merciless as he forced a 3rd true origin stone into his mouth. Even though his cultivation had been suppressed, an Eternal River Tier Elite was still an Eternal River Tier Elite. How could he be killed so easily? You're taking things too far. The Sher clan. No, the entire Treasure Forest Pavilion won't forgive you. Sher Gangyang was still talking tough with his divine sense. Huh, you're more stubborn than I imagined, Ling Han said with a chuckle. He grabbed another true origin stone and stuffed it into Sher Gangyang's mouth. Weren't you acting all arrogant and haughty just then? Didn't you want to dismiss me with a mere 100,000 true origin stones? Huh, a cultivator can be killed but not humiliated. You wanted to use these 100,000 true origin stones to dismiss me? Well, now I'm returning them all. Let's see how much you can stomach. Sher Gangyang instantly went as white as a sheet. Would his stomach explode if he swallowed all of these true origin stones? Most likely not. Even though he didn't possess a powerful physique, the bodies of Eternal River Tier Elites were still incredibly powerful. Thus, it would be extremely difficult to force it to the point of explosion. However, true origin stones were also incredibly tough. These weren't things that his body could easily digest. Thus, his belly would clearly reflect how many true origin stones he had swallowed. The image of his other body, parts remaining normal, while his belly became as large as a small mountain, flashed across Sher Gangyang's mind. He couldn't help but shudder at the thought of this. He truly couldn't comprehend what was happening right now. He was an entire minor level above Ling Han, and thus they should have at least been evenly matched, even if Ling Han was a 4-star genius. So, how had he been suppressed so easily? MMPH. He shook his head as Ling Han forced another true origin stone into his mouth. His belly visibly grew larger again. Ling Han smiled faintly. However, in Sher Gangyang's eyes, he was nothing short of a devil. Aren't you afraid of the Treasure Forest Pavilion taking revenge? Sher Gangyang asked in anger. Pa! Ling Han ruthlessly slapped him again. Have you become stupid after eating too many stones? Would I be doing this if I were afraid? Sure enough, as someone who dared to cheat me, there's something wrong with your brain. Sher Gangyang genuinely wanted to cry. How had he provoked such a ruthless person? Not only was he unfathomably powerful, but he was also a fearless person who didn't give a toss about his background. He wasn't giving face to even the Treasure Forest Pavilion. I'll return your belongings to you, he hurriedly shouted. He was afraid that Ling Han might eventually kill him. There's no hurry, Ling Han said with a shake of his head. In any case, you can't escape from me, so why don't we enjoy ourselves for a little longer? Enjoy your mom. Sher Gangyang roared in his mind. He couldn't endure this for much longer. Ling Han glared at him and said, Did you curse me in your mind? MMPH. Sher Gangyang hurriedly shook his head. However, another true origin stone was stuffed in his mouth at this moment, and the pain that it caused made him flail about wildly. Ling Han wore an earnest expression as he said, One should be honest and upright. Cursing someone in your mind isn't a good habit. Sher Gangyang felt an urge to curse him again. I simply cursed you in my mind, yet you're already torturing me to such an extent. What would happen if I cursed you aloud? However, he only dared to think this in his mind. He didn't dare to say it out aloud. Are they tasty? You can have more if they're tasty. There's no hurry. After all, there's no one fighting over them with you. Ling Han forced true origin stone after true origin stone into his mouth. This was the price for daring to steal his belongings. Shi Gangyang felt like he was about to die. However, how could mere physical pain cause an eternal river tier elite to lose their consciousness? Tears started to stream down his face, and he said, "I'll give you whatever you want. Just let me go." Nonsense. Those godly metals were originally mine anyway. Stop pretending to be generous. Ling Han continued to stuff true origin stones into his mouth. Shi Gangyang had used these 100,000 true origin stones to humiliate him, so he would naturally return the favor using the exact same true origin stones. Shi Gangyang sobbed even louder. If he had known this earlier, he would have only given Ling Han one true origin stone. Chapter 1528 Hidden Hand. Chapter 1528 Hidden Hand. Ling Han increased his speed. Half a day passed, and he finally managed to stuff all of the 100,000 true origin stones into Shi Gangyang's belly. Right now, Shi Gangyang was completely unable to close his mouth. Meanwhile, his belly was so large that it was enough to astound anyone who saw it. The outlines of the true origin stones could be clearly seen on his belly, and it would cause one to question whether or not his belly was about to explode. However, Eternal River Tier elites would have definitely cultivated their physique before it was just a matter of how much they had done so. In any case, their bellies wouldn't be forced to the point of bursting so easily. Ling Han clapped his hands, extremely satisfied with his own work. Shi Gangyang's appearance was extremely comical right now, with his gigantic belly completely disproportionate to his seemingly small limbs and head. Ling Han then proceeded to take all of Shi Gangyang's spatial spirit tools. However, his expression instantly darkened. There were only a mere 17 pieces of level 14 godly metals inside these spatial spirit tools, and the rest of the items were all true origin stones. There were several 100,000,000 true origin stones in total. However, this was nothing compared to the godly metal that he had given Lin Yuqi. "You're truly seeking death." Ling Han raised his fists and dealt another vicious beating to Shi Gangyang. When he was satisfied, he tossed Shi Gangyang aside and said, "I'll give you 3 days' time to gather everything that belongs to me. If you can't satisfy me," he pondered for a moment before continuing, "I'll find 100 boars to backdoor you." He strode away after issuing this threat. Shi Gangyang shuddered upon hearing this. He wanted to immediately leave this dangerous place. However, his cultivation had been suppressed, so how could he escape? Ling Han had only just left the Treasure Forest Pavilion when he heard a sweet voice say, "Oh, isn't this little brother Han?" "Lin Yuqi." Ling Han wore a cold expression as he turned around, and he said, "You still dare to show yourself?" "Why wouldn't I dare? You're not a man-eating tiger, are you? Should I be afraid of you eating me?" Lin Yuqi swayed her hips as she walked over, accentuating the curves of her shapely body. The passers-by couldn't help but pinch their noses, afraid that they would get a nosebleed. She tossed a spatial ring toward Ling Han as she said, "If I didn't show myself, how would you get your belongings back?" Ling Han caught the spatial ring and inspected it with his divine sense. There was a huge amount of godly metal within it, ranging from level 11 to level 13. There were countless godly metals of each level. There was an aggrieved look on Lin Yuqi's face, and she said, "I've been working hard for you this entire time. However, that bastard arrived half a year ago and forcefully took over my position. I'd kept a hidden hand, though, and it was because of this that I managed to retain most of your belongings. Moreover, most of the level 14 godly metal is still with me." Ling Han's anger subsided upon receiving his godly metal, and he asked, "What on earth happened?" "That bastard is interested in me, and he came to this branch using the excuse of performing an inspection. However, he became greedy upon seeing me selling a piece of godly metal every few days. So he forcefully took over my position," Lin Yuqi explained. "Fortunately, I was able to install a few workers who are loyal to me. They would immediately notify me whenever you arrived. Ling Han nodded in understanding. He then pondered for a moment before walking back to the treasure forest pavilion. Oi, oi, what are you doing? Lin Yuqi hurriedly ran over to block him. I came here to meet you, so I could avoid that bastard. Are you going to walk straight back into his trap? She naturally didn't know that Ling Han was already powerful enough to easily suppress Shi Gangyang. Thus, she was afraid that Ling Han would go and recklessly argue with Shi Gangyang. Doing so would be like a sheep walking into the mouth of a tiger. Ling Han didn't reply, and he continued to stride toward the pharmacy. How could Lin Yuqi block him? Thus, she had no option but to follow behind him. She would convince Shi Gangyang to let him off no matter what. After all, it was extremely likely that Ling Han would advance to the Genesis tier in the future. Such a being couldn't be offended. However, her jaw involuntarily dropped when she followed Ling Han into the backyard of the pharmacy. There was a look of utter disbelief on her face. What in the world? That's Shi Gangyang. Yes, that's indeed his face. However, his body is far too different. How has he become so obese? Shi Gangyang was currently vomiting true origin stones. His cultivation had been sealed, so it was extremely difficult for him to remove the true origin stones from his body. Up until now, he had only managed to vomit up a dozen or so true origin stones. Upon seeing Ling Han arrive, he couldn't help but shudder in fright. Why has he come again? 3 days have already passed? That quickly? Ling Han threw a punch. Pum! Shi Gangyang was instantly obliterated into pieces. True origin stones burst into the air. Since he had already recovered his lost belongings, there was no reason to keep Shi Gangyang alive any longer. He had dared to steal so many of his belongings, so killing him would be the only way to quench his anger. Lin Yuqi still had yet to come to her senses. She remained in a state of disbelief for a while longer before suddenly jumping up and exclaiming, "You actually killed Shi Gangyang!" "No need to thank me," Ling Han said with a smile. Lin Yuqi grabbed onto his sleeves and said, "He was an Eternal River tier elite. His death will be like an earthquake to the Treasure Forest Pavilion. Things definitely won't end here." Ling Han smiled and said, "No worries. Just spread the story. Say that he discovered a treasure storage, yet was killed by someone while exploring it." "You want me to lie?" Lin Yuqi said with a roll of her eyes. "Don't tell me you didn't want him to die." "Fine, I also detested that annoying fly. However, I'm also not lying to you. Eternal River tier elites are far too important to the Treasure Forest Pavilion, especially Shi Gangyang. He was only 100 million years old, and he possessed the potential to advance to the consummate level. Not only was he important to the Shi clan, but he was also extremely important to the entire Treasure Forest Pavilion, Lin Yuqi said solemnly. Ling Han was unfazed by this, and he replied, "No matter. Just spread the news. By the time the Treasure Forest Pavilion figures it out and sends someone here, that'll already be 40 or 50 years into the future. Right now, the only thing that he was short on was time. Just how powerful would he be in 40 to 50 years' time?" Ling Han returned, and Lin Yuqi remained to clean up the mess. If she couldn't regain authority after Shi Gangyang's death, then that would simply be a reflection on how poor her abilities were. After returning to the academy, Ling Han organized the godly metals according to their level before retrieving his divine demon sword to absorb them. The quality of the divine demon sword soared as the pieces of godly metal were consumed one after another. Level 12. Level 13. The divine demon sword advanced 2 levels in a row, yet it was still unable to reach level 14. This was because there wasn't enough level 13 godly metal. Ling Han sent Ding Ping to request Lin Yuqi purchase more level 13 godly metal. However, she didn't need to purchase too much. All he needed was another 20 pieces or so. However, The higher the level of the godly metal, the more difficult it would be to obtain. This wasn't something that could be done in just a few days' time. It might take a year, or it might take several years. Ling Han calmed his mind and prepared to break through to the medium extreme of the eternal river tier. Meanwhile, Empress Luanxing had already advanced to the medium extreme. Right now, her divine fetus was even more powerful than what Gu Daoi's had been. She was cultivating with 10 bodies after all, so it was only natural that her cultivation speed was incredible. After receiving the inheritance of the 3 Phoenix Kings, the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden's cultivation also started to advance rapidly. The benefits that she received wouldn't be immediately evident. However, she would see her cultivation speed increase by 10,000-fold before advancing to the Genesis tier. Thus, she had managed to advance to the medium extreme of the heavenly body tier, and then the high extreme not long after. Moreover, all of this was just in a few months' time. Meanwhile, the Rain Emperor and the Notionless Saint had also advanced to the Eternal River tier, thanks to the help of some saintly medicine. However, Su Ran was still unable to advance, no matter what. His amount of talent was the only thing that was holding him back. Pum! One day, the tranquility of Ling Han's life was finally broken. The gate of his courtyard was kicked open, revealing 3 unwelcome guests. Chapter 1529, Further Provocation. Chapter 1529, Further Provocation. There was a clear regulation in the Martial Arts Academy. The residence of a disciple would be a forbidden area that was off limits to all other disciples unless they received an express invitation to enter. Those who broke this rule would be punished. On the less severe end of the spectrum, they might be directly expelled from the academy. On the more severe end, however, they might have their cultivation crippled or even be executed. Thus, the disciples of the academy were all extremely at ease. Their residences would be a safe harbor where they could peacefully cultivate. However, this extremely strict rule was suddenly broken. 3 people barged into Ling Han's residence, their demeanor ferocious and haughty. Ling Han left his room, only to see that there were 2 men and 1 woman. Moreover, he recognized 2 of the 3 intruders. One of the men was Kai Miao, a big shot of the 8th campus. Meanwhile, the woman enjoyed an even higher status. She was Zhu Xiu'er, the wife of the great saint. The last man was extremely young, and he was a youth in the truest sense of the word. He was only 20 or so years old. Yet he had already reached the mountain river tier. This was quite astonishing. One had to realize that Ling Han had also only been at the mountain river tier when he was at the same age as him. Ling Han, Zhu Xiu'er said coldly. She wore a menacing and hateful look as she pointed at Ling Han with her slender finger. She had wanted to bring trouble upon Ling Han back then, and she had purposefully tried to help Gu Daoi during the competition between the new disciples. However, the great saint had personally spoken and righted the record. That was equivalent to slapping her across the face. Although she had been furious at the time, did she dare to go against a great saint? However, things were different now. Her son was being raised as the successor of the great saint, and she had more so educated him to be extremely obedient toward her. In fact, even the great saint didn't dare to offend her. After all, could he abandon his son? Thus, she was finally able to barge over and seek revenge. This had been over a dozen years in the making, and she had also had to suppress her fury for this entire time. Ling Han smiled as he clasped his hands and said, "Greetings, Saint Missus." This was standard etiquette, and he couldn't give them more excuses to target him. "You dare to remain standing after seeing the Saint Missus?" Kai Miao asked balefully. He had never forgotten Ling Han's crime of breaking the tradition of the academy. Meanwhile, Zhu Xiu'er stood tall and proud as she crossed her arms before her chest. She naturally had to exhibit her might as the Saint Missus. Ling Han shook his head and asked, "Which rule of the academy states that I have to kneel before the Saint Missus?" "This isn't a rule of the academy, but it's the most basic etiquette. Do you dare to disrespect a saint? Kai Miao roared sternly. Of the 4 big shots of the 8th campus, Yu Susu had always put her full concentration on studying formations. She hoped to become a saint through formations. In fact, Ling Han had never even met her before. Meanwhile, Rin Feiyun was on the side of Ling Han. Although Qi Tian was also a proponent of old traditions, he was far less extreme than Kai Miao. This was especially the case after he learned that Ling Han had even dared to argue with the Saint Missus. Upon learning of that, he gave up on trying to force Ling Han to lower his head. Of the 4 big shots, only Kai Miao was insistent on dealing with Ling Han. However, Ling Han had always been in either the Black Tower or his own residence. Moreover, with his status, Kai Miao couldn't stand guard outside Ling Han's residence all day long either. Thus, he had never found an opportunity to deal with him. It was only now that he had finally found a great opportunity. The Saint Missus was personally visiting Ling Han to deal with him, and she was even bringing her son along with her. She and Kai Miao had instantly reached an agreement to barge over together. Even if the sky fell, wasn't the Saint Missus here to hold it up for him? Ling Han shook his head and said, "My respect for saints lies in my heart. I don't need to act it out for others to see." Pathetic sophism. Kai Miao said with a cold humph, "Are you going to kneel or not?" It was Ling Han's refusal to crawl through the dog flap that had sparked all of this conflict in the first place. However, even the Saint Missus and the son of the great saint were present now. Could Ling Han still persist with his stubbornness? Ling Han simply looked over to the young man. He was none other than the son and only child of the Star Sand Saint. At that time, he had still been a bratty child who cried for everyone to become his horsey. In fact, he had even been frightened by Ling Han. A dozen or so years had passed, and the bratty child of the past had already grown up to become a handsome and energetic young man. He smiled and said, "Young man you are." A bashful smile appeared on the youth's face, and he replied, "I'm Mi Shiweming. So the Star Sand Saint surname is Mi." Ling Han involuntarily chuckled upon seeing his reaction. Back then, this Mi Shiweming had been a bratty child who had even used a heavenly body tier cultivator as his horse. Upon seeing the heavenly phoenix divine maiden, he had even insisted on having her become his wife. Yet he was acting all shy and bashful now. It was very likely that the Star Sand Saint had taught him well. Descendants of genuinely powerful clans were indeed proud, but this pride was usually hidden within their mind. From the outside, they would appear especially cordial and easygoing. Ling Han! Zhu Xiu'er and Kai Miao roared in unison. He was acting far too arrogant. He had actually ignored both of them. Detain him! Zhu Xiu'er was finally unable to contain her fury any longer. Ling Han had acted in an identical manner back then, completely ignoring her words. In her eyes, all she wanted was some face. Was it that difficult for him to lower his head toward her? Kai Miao sneered coldly. With the Saint Missus present, who would dare to obstruct him? Rin Feiyun wouldn't dare, and the Tranquil Heart Saint would most likely also turn a blind eye. After all, he wouldn't dare to challenge the actions of the Saint Missus, would he? Shou! A fragrant scent breezed over as Empress Luanxing and the heavenly phoenix divine maiden appeared beside Ling Han. The Empress peered down at Zhu Xiu'er. She was an incredibly proud individual, and she couldn't care less about Zhu Xiu'er being the Saint Missus or whatnot. Anyone who dared to disrespect her husband was as good as provoking her might. Moreover, her fury was enough to make wind and clouds lose color. Gasp! Zhu Xiu'er couldn't help but widen her eyes in astonishment upon seeing the Empress. In fact, even her breathing stopped for a second. How could there be such a beautiful woman in the world? From her appearance to her physique and also to her demeanor, every single aspect of her being was indescribably perfect. "How audacious!" the Empress roared as she rose 3 meters into the air. She pointed down at Zhu Xiu'er and the others and said, "You dared to disrespect my husband? Have you people become tired of living?" Zhu Xiu'er finally regained her senses upon hearing this, and rage instantly spread across her face. This B***th actually dared to scold her. Moreover, she had purposefully risen 3 meters into the air. Just how much contempt did she hold for them? She also hovered into the air, rising 3 meters above Empress Lanxing. "Are you not going to kneel and greet the Saint Missus?" Ling Han smiled before pulling the Empress down and into his embrace. "There's no need to argue with this type of person. It's not worthwhile. The Empress smiled sweetly as she replied with a gentle nod. Fuck! Kai Miao's eyes were red with jealousy. Even though he viewed himself as a supreme prodigy, and even though he only had cultivation on his mind, his heart still swayed when he saw the stunningly beautiful Empress. In fact, he could barely control himself. However, such a beautiful and noble celestial maiden was actually acting all sweet and gentle as she rested in Ling Han's embrace. The sight of this was like having knives plunged into his heart. "Humph, you've disrespected the traditions, and you've even dared to talk back to the Saint Missus. Obediently bow down and accept your crimes." Kai Miao finally lashed out at Ling Han. "You dare!" The Empress' gaze became sharp, and she immediately leaped forward to block Kai Miao's attack. Boom! A devastating aura burst into the surroundings. This was the unique and overwhelming might of her divine fetus. Its effects were similar to Ling Han's Heaven's Might in that it could prevent others from unleashing their full power. Such was the Empress' power that even the big shots wouldn't dare to underestimate her. Kai Miao didn't want to battle against the Empress, yet she left him with no option but to do so. He immediately altered his attack to grab at her. In any case, this presented a good opportunity for him. If he wanted to conquer this noble and proud woman, the first step would be to shatter her pride. How would he shatter it? With strength, of course. The Empress smiled balefully as a brick appeared in her hands. Chapter 1530, Sudden Arrival of a Sane. Chapter 1530, Sudden Arrival of a Sane. An intense battle broke out between the Empress and Kai Miao, and this battle was quickly taken into the sky. Although there were the formations of saints here, a battle between two eternal river tier elites, especially two whose battle prowess had reached the consummate level, would definitely be able to destroy all of these formations. Of course, if these formations hadn't existed, then everything in the surroundings would have already been obliterated. In fact, this expanse of land would have become part of the sea. Such a tremendous battle naturally attracted the attention of many people. The disciples all walked out from their residences and gazed up at the sky. However, what they saw instantly caused cold sweat to form on their foreheads. Incredible! This battle is far too incredible. Who is this? She's actually able to rival a big shot. Yu Susu. No. Someone recognized the Empress, and they quietly revealed her identity. This information quickly spread among the disciples. She was a newly recruited disciple. The old disciples all became numb with shock upon hearing this. What kind of freaks had the academy recruited this time? Gu Daoyi had possessed a divine fetus, and he had more so been regarded as the greatest prodigy of all eternity. In fact, he had even become a disciple of the great saint. After him, there was also Ling Han, a new disciple who was renowned as a troublemaker. He was someone who even dared to talk back to the Saint Missus. At the same time, Ling Han also possessed astonishing strength. During the competition between new disciples, he had even managed to defeat Gu Daoyi. Moreover, many old disciples had also experienced defeat at his hands. It was rumored that even elites at the consummate level of the Eternal River tier mightn't be able to suppress him. However, regardless of their achievements, there was an indestructible bottom line in the minds of the old disciples. The big shots couldn't be defeated. Regardless of how freakish the new disciples were, they would have no option but to bow their heads before the 4 big shots. Now, however, this final bottom line had also been obliterated. Empress Luanxing was battling against a big shot, and she was only at a very minor disadvantage. How is this possible? It's that brick. That's right. Through my careful observations, I've noticed that her brick possesses an incredibly powerful defensive ability. It's as if it can absorb all attacks. Otherwise, that woman definitely couldn't rival a big shot. Even if that's the case, she still possesses astonishing battle prowess. After all, she's only at a minor disadvantage. She's also breathtakingly beautiful. Heavens, how can there be such a stunningly beautiful person in the world? She's so noble and she's so proud. In fact, even her angry expression is beautiful and intoxicating. Before this, the Empress had only revealed her appearance during the competition between the new disciples. As such, none of the old disciples had ever witnessed her appearance before. Now that they witnessed it, they were all stunned by her beauty. Moreover, they naturally shifted to supporting her instead of Kai Miao. Of course, this was only in terms of the male students. Contrary to them, the female students were all wild with jealousy. They strongly desired for Kai Miao to ruin her beauty. However, the cultivation world was dominated by men, and the 8th campus was no exception to this phenomenon. There were only 30 or so female disciples in the entire 8th campus. Thus, they naturally couldn't turn the tide of popular opinion. Everyone was shouting in support of the Empress, not considering the fact that Kai Miao might settle matters with them one by one after this. Humph! Zhu Xiu'er was enraged, and she humphed coldly as she unleashed her might as the Saint Missus. Silence! Anyone who dares to utter another word will be expelled. To most people, the title of Saint Missus was still filled with might and power. Thus, the onlookers quickly shut their mouths. However, they still silently cheered for the Empress in their minds. The Saint Missus couldn't forbid them from doing this, could she? Meanwhile, Ling Han waved his hand at Mi Xueming and said, "Come, junior brother me, let's have a chat." This was blatant provocation. An expression of wild fury spread across Zhu Xiu'er's face. "You're looking down on me far too much." However, she was truly helpless against Ling Han. After all, there were only so many people who could suppress him. Could it be that she had to seek help from the Tranquil Heart Saint? However, if he had wanted to greet her, he would have done so a long time ago. With the divine sense of a saint, how could he have not detected her arrival? The fact that he hadn't come over to greet her signified that he wanted to avoid her. Since this was the case, would she be able to find him? Zhu Xiu'er felt extremely stifled. With her lofty status, she was actually unable to deal with a measly disciple of the academy. A saintly might rippled into the surroundings as the Tranquil Heart Saint unexpectedly appeared before the disciples. Zhu Xiu'er couldn't help but chuckle coldly and say, "Tranquil Heart, how arrogant of you! I've been here for so long, yet you're only coming here to greet me now." The Tranquil Heart Saint ignored her accusations, frowning slightly as he gazed up at the sky. Ling Han was slightly astonished. The Tranquil Heart Saint wasn't faking his expression. However, what could cause a saint to frown? A thick golden path suddenly descended from the sky, exuding a saintly might as it did so. Another saint had arrived. In the blink of an eye, a figure walked out from among the dazzling golden path. It looked as if he were walking slowly, yet each stride of his could actually cover hundreds of millions of kilometers. Before the disciples knew it, he had already arrived inside the academy. This was a tall and slim middle-aged man. His skin was pale, and there was the symbol of a rock between his brows. "How should I address you, fellow cultivator?" the Tranquil Heart Saint asked. His tone was extremely solemn. Saints were the most powerful beings of the world. Even if this person were only a small saint, he would still possess the ability to kill everyone present if he went wild. Of course, this was apart from the 10 saints. However, the wife and son of the Star Sand Saint were present, so the Tranquil Heart Saint naturally didn't dare to be careless. The middle-aged man glanced at the Tranquil Heart Saint before replying, "I'm Huing Mu." "Fellow cultivator, who?" The Tranquil Heart Saint clasped his hands in greeting. "I'm Tranquil Heart. Dare I ask why you've suddenly come here?" Huing Mu calmly glanced at him again and said, "Several young members of the Hu clan were killed, and through my deduction, I've concluded that their deaths are related to this place. He was here to seek revenge." The Tranquil Heart Saint's expression darkened, and he said, "Then you must investigate carefully. After all, a case involving human lives should be treated with utmost care." Huing Mu was unfazed by the Tranquil Heart Saint's words. He swept his gaze over every single disciple. Under his gaze, the disciples all felt as if they were naked, with not a single secret able to remain hidden. Only when the Tranquil Heart Saint humphed did he retract his gaze. "I've already discovered an ancient chariot on a nearby planet. That's definitely not a chariot that you people can possess. From my deductions, someone here coincidentally came across the disciples of my Hu clan after they obtained some treasures. They then attacked my disciples and ended up killing them." He paused for a moment before continuing, "My request is simple. Hand over the treasures and the culprit." The Tranquil Heart Saint chuckled coldly. "You're acting far too arrogant. You suddenly arrived here and now you're asking for this and that? Do you think this is your territory? You're only a small saint, yet there are 10 saints guarding this planet. In fact, there's even a great saint. There's no room for you to act all smug and arrogant." "I have no obligation to satisfy your request," the Tranquil Heart Saint said. He resolutely refuted Huing Mu's request. Huing Mu was just about to get angry, yet he suddenly saw Empress Lanxing and Kai Miao descend from the sky at this moment. In fact, he had only managed to descend here because he had discovered the Empress battle against Kai Miao. After all, they were extremely powerful Eternal River tier elites. He had been unfazed before, yet his eyes instantly lit up when he saw Empress Lanxing. The Empress beauty was definitely enough to capture the hearts of all men. Even saints were no exception to this. Saints were also human, just that they were slightly more powerful. In any case, Huing Mu hadn't cultivated so earnestly for some noble and lofty aim. Indeed, every single cultivator yearned to become a Genesis tier saint. However, this wasn't their ultimate goal, and there was naturally a reason behind their desire. Some people simply wanted to become more powerful, while others wanted to obtain a longer lifespan. Meanwhile, there were also those who desired to obtain more power, those who wanted freedom, and those who wanted beautiful women. Huing Mu wasn't that interested in women, but the Empress beauty was enough to capture his interest and shatter his self-control. Moreover, as a saint, he would naturally take whatever he wanted. He didn't need to be afraid of anything or anyone. As such, he reached over and wantonly grabbed at Empress Lanxing. Chapter 1531, Surrounded by Saints. 1531, Surrounded by Saints. "How dare you?" The Tranquil Heart Saint roared in rage. This person actually dared to kidnap his disciple before his eyes? Did this person think that he was a pushover? He lashed out with his palm, his might as a saint also emanating outward. Even heaven and earth would lose their luster when a saint unleashed their fury. Huing Mu humphed upon seeing this. He had no choice but to retract his hand and parry the Tranquil Heart Saint's attack. Even though he viewed himself as far superior to the Tranquil Heart Saint, his opponent was still a fellow saint after all. Thus, how could he dare to face the Tranquil Heart Saint's attack without any defenses? That would be seeking death. Pum! The two of them exchanged a strike, sending bursts of shock waves rippling into the surroundings. Boom! The entire campus was instantly obliterated by these devastating shock waves. At the same time, countless people were thrown into the air as if they were mere hay. Some of them vomited blood, while some others suffered even worse fate. They had their arms or legs brutally torn off. At this moment, it was as if the campus had become a living hell. Fortunately, they still had the saint-level formation to block some of the shock waves. As such, none of the disciples were killed. This was the power of saints. Just a tiny fraction of the shock waves from their exchange was already devastating enough to slaughter countless people. Moreover, this was already in the scenario where there was a saint-level formation to block some of the shock waves. If they continued to exchange blows like this, the disciples of the academy would definitely suffer huge casualties. Damn it! The tranquil heart saint cursed. His hair was standing on ends, and it was clear that he was beside himself with fury. Under the influence of the Star Sand Saint, the Tranquil Heart Saint, and the other 8 small saints had all developed a hobby of nurturing young talents. They didn't necessarily treat each of their disciples as a son or daughter, but they did indeed pour a lot of their time and effort into raising them. However, the academy that they had developed for so many years was going to be whimsically destroyed just like this, and their disciples were more so going to be wantonly slaughtered. Thus, it was only natural that the Tranquil Heart Saint was incandescent with rage. "Do you have the right or ability to stop me?" Huang Mu sneered. Couldn't they see that he had come from the Forbidden Land? As such, was his battle prowess one that a small saint could rival? He couldn't care less about the lives of these cultivators. He immediately launched another attack, seeking to suppress the Tranquil Heart Saint. "You've taken things too far!" the Tranquil Heart Saint roared. Whoa! The godly bones in his body lit up as he activated them. He raised a hand, and a burst of sword light instantly swept outward, illuminating the entire sky. Huang Mu faltered for a moment. He then turned around and retreated several steps. He was slightly astonished. "I've indeed underestimated you. You've actually managed to transform your own body into a formation." The Tranquil Heart Saint remained silent as he continued to launch attacks at Huang Mu. His body was surrounded by sword intent, and it was extremely evident that he was truly enraged. His killing intent was already soaring into the sky. "However, this still isn't enough to stop me," Huang Mu announced haughtily. 8 stones technique." His muscles started to bulge up, and he quickly transformed into a gigantic rock golem. Each rock that he was composed of was like an indestructible saintly material. That was right, his body would be as tough as saintly material of the same level when he channeled the 8 stones technique. "You're nothing but a mere ant." He wore an expression of utter disdain as he charged at the Tranquil Heart Saint. In the eyes of those from the Forbidden Lands, cultivators from the immortal realm were nothing but mere ants. This would be the case even if they were Genesis tier saints. At most, they could only be considered as slightly more powerful ants. This was an innate contempt that they held. The 2 saints were locked in an intense battle. Meanwhile, the others were all fleeing for their lives. Otherwise, they would definitely be killed if they were accidentally hit by a shockwave from the battle. Wang. Several golden paths streaked over one after another. The Black River Saint, Dawn Cloud Saint, and the remaining 8 small saints had all rushed over. They acted in unison and immediately dissipated the shock waves that were surging into the surroundings. If they didn't do so, the disciples would definitely suffer a casualty rate of over 60%. Moreover, these small saints hadn't come by themselves. In fact, they were all accompanied by some disciples from their own campuses. Of course, these were all the most outstanding disciples. With his worries gone, and with 8 other small saints to guard the surroundings, the Tranquil Heart Saint instantly unleashed his full battle prowess. However, Huang Mu truly hadn't been lying. He was indeed more powerful than the Tranquil Heart Saint. This was especially the case now that he was channeling the 8 stone technique. His physique was astonishing, and few at the same cultivation level as him would be able to wound him. Put simply, he was near undefeatable. This was also the reason why he dared to provoke others so wantonly, and a reason that he looked down upon other saints. What? The tranquil heart saint is actually being suppressed by him. It can't be. Although the tranquil heart saint is the 8th out of the star sand saint's 9 disciples, his battle prowess is definitely powerful enough to rank within the top 3. Don't worry, we have 9 saints on our side. The disciples were all engrossed by the spectacular battle. Saints were synonymous with invincibility in their minds. Yet a battle between 2 saints would naturally yield a victor and a loser. It was just that they hadn't expected Huangmu to be more powerful. Humph! The Dipankar saint and hardship alchemy saint leaped forward and joined the battle in unison. If they didn't act now, it would only be a matter of time before the tranquil heart saint was defeated. To say nothing of 3 saints, I'll still suppress you if all 9 of you join. Huangmu said with a sneer. These saints had relied on themselves to discover the saintly Tao. Thus, how could their Tao rival the inheritances from the Forbidden Lands? Huangmu roared as he swung his fists in unison, unleashing a boundless power. His 3 opponents didn't dare to face his attack head-on. In fact, they had no option but to continuously retreat. The torrential rain saint and iron saber saint exchanged a glance before both leaping over to join the battle as well. However, they were still unable to gain the upper hand. Everyone was stunned. They were all saints. So how did their battle prowess differ by so much? This wasn't a small gap in power, but rather a huge gulf in power. The 5 saints had teamed up, yet they were still unable to suppress Huangmu. In fact, Huangmu was the one who was enjoying the advantage. This was unbelievable. Now that it had come to this, the remainder of the 9 saints had no choice but to join the battle. Only then were they able to wrest back some momentum. However, defeating Huangmu was nothing more than a pipe dream. That's enough, a calm voice suddenly said. This voice was like the intent of heaven and earth, and it was not something that the cultivators could resist. Master, the 9 saints naturally pulled away from the battle. A conflicting look appeared on Huangmu's face. In the end, however, he still decided to stop. So there was still another saint. Your strength is above mine, so I wasn't able to detect you at all. Even though he said this, the look of haughtiness on his face wasn't dampened in the slightest. This was because he was a member of the 8 Stones Forbidden Land. Any random Grand Elder from there could easily crush the cultivators of the Immortal Realm. You can leave now, the Star Sand Saint said calmly. Fine. Hand the culprit over, hand the treasures over, and also hand that woman over. Huangmu pointed at Empress Luanxing as he spoke. Just then, he had only discovered her otherworldly beauty. Now that he looked more carefully, he discovered that even her physique was freakishly powerful. She definitely possessed a divine fetus. If he had children with this woman, they would definitely possess unparalleled talent. You've crossed the line, the Star Sand Saint said coldly. In his eyes, his disciples weren't just his disciples. They were also his face and his reputation. If he failed to protect even his disciples, then what right did he have to be a great saint? In any case, Huangmu was just a small saint. Regardless of how powerful he was, the fact remained that he was a small saint. Friend, Huangmu began. The 9 saints were furious upon hearing this. Huangmu was but a small saint, yet he was actually referring to their esteemed master as friend. Was he trying to speak on the same level as their master? How audacious! However, Huangmu was unfazed by their furious glares, and he continued, You can't begin to imagine just how powerful the place that I come from is. If you disobey me, all of you will die. Humph! The Star Sand Saint was also unable to contain his anger any longer. A large hand instantly descended from the sky and swatted at Huangmu. The Star Sand Saint didn't even need to show himself. The gulf in power between a great saint and a small saint was analogous to the gulf in power between a mountain river tier cultivator and a mere mortal. It was insurmountable. Boom! To say nothing of blocking this attack. Huangmu didn't even have the ability to flee from this attack. He instantly disappeared under the large hand. However, there was a sudden flash of gray light. Pa! The large hand was surprisingly shattered, revealing Huangmu's unscathed figure. Gasp! Even a great saint couldn't contain him. Chapter 1532. Who can withstand a single strike of mine? 1532. Who can withstand a single strike of mine? Huangmu's body was shrouded in a layer of dazzling light. Looking closely, the cultivators discovered that this was actually a precious robe. There were several glowing divine patterns on this robe, and it was as if heaven and earth were expounding some profoundly mysterious notion. Huangmu hadn't been able to resist the attack of the great saint because of his own abilities, but rather because of this precious robe. In fact, this was much more understandable. If he truly had been that powerful, then wouldn't he have suppressed the tranquil heart saint and the other small saint long ago? Ha 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 ha! Huangmu roared with laughter. You people are nothing but a smattering of ants. Yet you actually attempted to injure me? Where is your confidence coming from? Audacious. How incredibly audacious. In any case, it's not as if you genuinely have the power to resist the attack of a saint. Huangmu peered down at the cultivators and said, What a bunch of trash! You people will still be trash even if you manage to reach the saint tier. This was the sense of superiority that those from the Forbidden Lands possessed. Huangmu held an innate disdain for those of the immortal realm, especially since he had viewed himself as a descendant from the celestial realm since the very beginning. He was convinced that he would one day return to the celestial realm. The Star Sand Saint's voice rang out again. Your precious robe isn't truly woven from saintly material. Rather, it's like a decree in that there's a limit regarding how long it can be used for. So, how long can you withstand my attacks for? I can withstand 100 of your attacks without a problem, Huangmu replied confidently. He retrieved a drum and said, This is a child-parent drum, and once I strike it and channel my divine sense into it, I'll be able to instantly teleport to the location of the parent drum. You're a great saint, and I'm indeed unable to rival you. However, there are 3 saint kings in the 8 stones Forbidden Land, and any one of them possesses the ability to reign supreme over the entire world. Are you sure you want to provoke the ancestors of my clan? This was a blatant threat. However, this threat was very effective. Saint Kings. What kind of concept was this? These were beings who were unrivaled throughout heaven and earth. They were the most powerful beings of the immortal realm. The gulf between Saint Kings and Great Saints was like the gulf between great saints and small saint. They would possess a definite and overwhelming advantage. If they truly provoked a Saint King, what kind of calamity would they be bringing upon themselves? Heavens, there are genuinely Saint Kings in this world? Is he bluffing? The 10 saints all shook their heads. With their experience, they could naturally determine the level of the divine patterns on Huangmu's precious robe. It had indeed surpassed the level of Great Saint. In other words, there was indeed a Saint King within the 8 stones Forbidden Land. Of course, it was still anyone's guess if there was 1 Saint King or 3. The Star Sand Saint remained silent, and his 9 disciples also remained silent. Ha 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 ha. Only Huangmu's wanton and arrogant laugh reverberated throughout the surroundings. What a bunch of weaklings. It's not that I'm looking down on you, but I can withstand the strike of a great saint. However, which of you can withstand a single strike of mine? Is this even comparable? You're wearing a precious robe, and this is the only reason you were able to withstand the attack of the great saint. It wasn't through your own abilities. However, you're using this as a foundation for your arrogance, and you're even looking down on the 10 saints. This is crossing the line. however, who dared to retort him. He had withstood the attack from the Star Sand Saint. However, among those below the level of Great Saint who could withstand a single strike of his, is there anyone? Is there? Huang Mu shouted arrogantly, "You're nothing but a bunch of weaklings. Am I wrong to say this?" "You're pushing it," the Star Sand Saint humphed. Huang Mu was a small saint, yet he actually dared to display such unbridled arrogance before him. How many years had it been since he had experienced such provocation and disrespect? Huang Mu reeled himself in a little, but there was still a cold sneer on his face. "My request still remains the same. Hand the culprit over, hand the treasures over, and hand that woman over. Otherwise, you can also select a person from among you. If they can withstand a single strike of mine, I'll retract my previous statements and even offer an apology. I'll then leave straight away." The 9 saints were infuriated upon hearing this. Huang Mu still dared to issue such blatantly unfair challenges. They were already showing incredible restraint by allowing him to go free. "If you refuse, I'll invite the ancestor of the Forbidden Land over," Huang Mu said menacingly. "At that time, all of you will only have the option of death." How incredibly arrogant! The disciples were all outraged. "Even if you're a saint, you're still taking things too far." "Let me go! Let me go! I'll face his attack." Numerous hot-blooded youths stepped forward and volunteered to accept Huang Mu's challenge. In fact, there were many big shots among these volunteers. These were supreme prodigies, and they were cultivators who were birthed and nurtured by heaven and earth. They possessed power that was unimaginable to most people. Moreover, they were only a step away from reaching the saint tier. However, this single step was like the insurmountable gulf between heaven and earth. "All of you get back," the Tranquil Heart Saint chided. The disciples all felt extremely aggrieved. The Star Sand Martial Arts Academy was a holy land for the hundreds of nearby galaxies. Whenever one mentioned the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy, it was as if they were talking about a pilgrimage site. This was a holy land that had produced countless powerful elites. Now, however, a single outsider had intruded and trampled all of them under his feet. This was both humiliating and infuriating. "In fact, I won't mind if one of you 9 accepts this challenge, either," Huang Mu said as he looked toward the 9 saints. They were all small saints, so how could the 9 saints fail to block just one of his strikes? The Tranquil Heart Saint stepped forward and said, "I'll battle against you." "You're not worthy," Huang Mu said with a shake of his head. There was disdain in his voice, and he continued, "You definitely won't be able to withstand a single strike of mine." Upon seeing the expression of fury on the Tranquil Heart Saint's face, he asked, "Did you think I was fighting with my full power just then?" "What?" The Tranquil Heart Saint pondered this question for a moment. In the end, he couldn't help but shake his head. He refused to believe that Huang Mu was this powerful. "If you can withstand a single strike of mine, I'll immediately turn around and leave." Huang Mu lifted a finger and made a tapping motion at the Tranquil Heart Saint. Wang. His precious robe lit up, with all of the divine patterns unleashing a brilliant glow. At the same time, a small black dot formed on the tip of his finger. However, this small black gave one a feeling of profoundness and boundlessness. Pung! His attack landed, and the Tranquil Heart Saint was instantly sent flying. His face was frighteningly pale, and he was coughing up large mouthfuls of blood. Just how powerful was the Tranquil Heart Saint? Yet he was still unable to withstand the power of a single finger from Huang Mu. Everyone was aware of what had happened. It was thanks to the might of his precious robe that Huang Mu had been able to defeat the Tranquil Heart Saint with a single strike. However, since this precious robe was being worn by Huang Mu, it could also be considered as a part of his abilities. After all, could one request their opponent to remove all of their high-level god tools in battle? Of course not. Is there anyone else? Hu Yingmu's expression was full of arrogance. Sweeping his gaze over the 9 saints one by one, the corners of his lips started to curl up in an even more disdainful smile. Even though the 9 saints were bursting with rage, not a single one of them opened their mouth to accept his challenge. Although the Tranquil Heart Saint was the Star Sand Saint's 8th disciple, he ranked in the top 3 when it came to battle prowess. However, even he had failed to withstand a single strike of Hu Yingmu. Thus, the other saints would certainly suffer an identical fate if they stepped forward. That being the case, they would merely be seeking humiliation if they accepted Hu Yingmu's challenge. However, looking at his arrogant expression, how could they not shake with absolute fury? Is there no one else? What a bunch of weaklings! Hu Yingmu shook his head and continued, "Remember to inscribe the word weakling in your minds in the future. That's how tiny and insignificant you people are. Now, hurry up and hand me what I want." He was incredibly conceited. He had come from a forbidden land, after all, so it was as if he were a heavenly emperor coming out to survey the world. Those of the immortal realm were only worthy to kneel down in his presence. "I'll accept your challenge." At this moment, a calm voice suddenly shattered the silence. At the same time, a young man stepped forward from the crowd of disciples. Shua! Everyone immediately turned around to look at the source of the voice. Ling Han. No one could have ever imagined this. Even the 9 saints were unable to withstand Hu Yingmu's might, yet Ling Han was actually stepping forward to accept his challenge. "Senior Brother Ling!" The new disciples couldn't help but shout. They were all incredibly moved. They naturally didn't believe that Ling Han was more powerful than the 9 saints. However, Ling Han had still stepped forward even after seeing one of the 9 saints being defeated with a single strike. What kind of courage did this take? The senior disciples were also moved upon seeing this. They had all heard about Ling Han's audacity in daring to retort the Saint Missus before. He was truly a courageous individual. However, his opponent this time was a saint. Moreover, this was an unfathomably powerful saint. Ling Han was gambling with his life. Some of the disciples felt that Ling Han was incredibly foolish. They felt that he shouldn't have acted so recklessly. However, they still admired his courage. Perhaps he was seeking death by accepting Hu Yingmu's challenge. However, he was also raising the morale of the entire martial arts academy. There were things that couldn't be abandoned, and there were also times when they couldn't keel over and submit. Chapter 1533 ILO Go. 1533 ILO Go. After stabilizing himself, the Tranquil Heart Saint glared at Ling Han and said, "Cut the nonsense out! Get back!" What an absolute joke! He hadn't died yet, so did he need his disciple to step forward to block his enemy for him? However, Ling Han smiled and said, "He's nothing more than a no-name from some small, unknown place. What does it matter if I face a single strike of his? No name." The disciples were all worked into a fervor upon hearing his words. "Aren't you extremely arrogant? Well, we're even more arrogant. Good on you, Senior Brotherling. Senior Brotherling, I love you." The new disciples all shouted in excitement. They were young, and thus they were all hot-blooded and easily worked up. However, many of the senior disciples were also influenced by this atmosphere, and they also joined into the chorus of shouting disciples. Even if they were killed by Hu Yingmu one by one, they still couldn't back down and weakly submit. They could lose, but they couldn't abandon their dignity. A cold look appeared in Hu Yingmu's eyes. These mere ants actually dared to belittle him? He waved his hand and said, "Come, I'll make sure to smash you into pieces with a single strike. In fact, I'll keep all of the broken pieces the same size as well." Ling Han waved his hand right back, saying, "Enough with the boasting. In any case, you're about to be slapped in the face." "Ha!" Hu Yingmu roared with laughter. This young man was truly arrogant. TSK, he was only 100 or so, Yet he had already reached the peak stage of the low extreme of the eternal river tier. His talent was truly quite astonishing. In fact, this talent was already on par with the supreme prodigies of the Forbidden Lands, perhaps even superior. Killing a prodigy like this would probably give him a great sense of achievement. Guy whose child doesn't have an asshole, hurry up and attack me. Grandpa Dog will concede that you're powerful if you manage to push me back a single step. A loud bark suddenly sounded from among the disciples. It went without saying that this was the voice of the large black dog. After all, how could he not participate in such an exciting confrontation? Hu Ingmu's expression instantly changed. He had been fully focused on cultivation for the entire first half of his life. As such, he had never considered the problem of having children and descendants. Rather, he planned to marry hundreds of women after advancing to the saint tier. However, having children as a saint was extremely difficult. Right now, this grandpa dog or whatever was actually cursing him to have children without assholes. This struck him right where it hurt. Who's barking? He wore a baleful expression as he swept his eyes over the disciples. It's your grandpa dog. If you can, come and bite me. The large black dog's voice was adrift, and it sounded like it was coming from different locations whenever he spoke. Even the saints were unable to pinpoint his location. His skills were extremely mysterious. Hu Ingmu unleashed his divine sense, which surged outward like billowing waves. He was going to uncover the large black dog. Oi, are you going to fight or not? Ling Han asked impatiently. You're a saint, after all, so why are you being so whiny and hesitant? Everyone laughed upon hearing this. Hu Ingmu was being relentlessly teased by Ling Han and the large black dog, and this dragged the disciples out from the frustration and hopelessness they had felt after the defeat suffered by the 9 saints. Hu Ingmu trained his gaze on Ling Han. Although he felt a strong desire to kill the large black dog, he was aware that he wouldn't be able to find him anytime soon. Thus, it wouldn't hurt to kill Ling Han first. This was also a supreme prodigy, and thus killing him would definitely give him a strong sense of achievement. Moreover, this person had even dared to ridicule him. Did he not deserve to die? Hold it right there! The tranquil heart saint roared as he stepped forward. He couldn't allow his disciple to battle for him. Xiao! Another golden path appeared as the star sand saint descended upon the scene. He couldn't maintain his composure any longer. He gave Ling Han a stare before waving his sleeves and saying, Stand back! Although Ling Han's talent was inferior to Gu Daoi's, his battle prowess among those at the same cultivation level was stronger. Thus, the star sand saint also had strong hopes for him. This being the case, he couldn't bear to watch him die. The star sand saint turned around to face Hu Ingmu. You can piss off now, he chided. However, Hu Ingmu was unfazed by this, and he said, I'll naturally leave if you give me what I want. Otherwise, I can also leave if one of you is able to withstand a single strike of mine. Not only will I leave, but I'll even offer an apology. I'll admit that I underestimated you ants and weaklings. He was still as arrogant as always, even in the presence of a great saint. The star sand saint wore a dark expression, and there was killing intent emanating from his body. He felt a strong desire to kill this person, even if it meant provoking the saint kings of the Forbidden Lands. Let me face him, Ling Han said as he stepped forward again. He's but a mere pawn, so there's no need for you to personally deal with him. Believe me, there was a look of strong conviction on Ling Han's face. An eternal river tier elite had actually uttered the words, believe me, before a great saint. What kind of confidence and boldness was this? The star sand saint was involuntarily stirred by Ling Han's demeanor. At the same time, a rare feeling of doubt arose in his mind. Had he misjudged Ling Han? Talent was indeed very important. However, had Gu Daoi possessed the type of confidence and domineering demeanor that Ling Han was displaying right now? This domineering nature, this confidence, this demeanor. Even the great saint was moved by Ling Han's spectacular display. This young man is incredible. He's definitely going to become a supreme elite. The Star Sand Saint silently made a decision in his mind. He was definitely going to protect Ling Han, no matter what, even if this meant killing Huang Mu and provoking the Saint Kings of the Forbidden Lands. If worst came to worst, he would simply relocate the entire martial arts academy. With the ginormous size of the immortal realm, could they not find somewhere safe to relocate? Ling Han took a few steps forward until he was standing face to face with Huang Mu. "Only one strike?" he asked. Huang Mu was in no hurry either, and he calmly replied, "Only one strike." Ling Han smiled and said, "How about 3 strikes? I'm afraid that you'll renege on your promise in anger and embarrassment if you fail to defeat me in a single strike." Pooh! Many of the disciples spluttered in shock upon hearing this. That was a saint he was speaking to. When a saint came up against an eternal river tier elite, unleashing 1 strike or unleashing 10,000 strikes wouldn't make an iota of difference. After all, the latter would be killed in a single strike. He was ridiculing him. Ling Han was definitely ridiculing Huang Mu. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. That Huang Mu is far too arrogant. It's only right that he also gets a taste of his own medicine. The large black dog couldn't help but stroke his chin as he stood upright on his hind legs. This brat is learning more and more of my demeanor. Could he be a child that I accidentally fathered in the past? Fortunately, Ling Han wasn't there to hear his musings. Otherwise, he would definitely chase after the large black dog and beat him to death. Huang Mu's eyes bulged in anger upon hearing this. There were flames of rage burning within them. The tongue of this person was far too toxic. He definitely couldn't allow him to speak anymore. Otherwise, he would die of rage, even if he was a saint. Die, measly ant. He immediately launched an attack, swatting his palm at Ling Han. He didn't activate any secret technique, and he more so didn't unleash the might of his precious robe. This was a simple and unremarkable strike. However, this was still the attack of a saint, after all, and thus it was powerful enough to crush heaven and earth, even being as casual as it was. Who under the level of saint could block this attack? Boom! His attack landed. The Star Sand Saint, Tranquil Heart Saint, and other saints were already prepared to intervene at any moment. They naturally wouldn't stand by idly and watch one of their disciples be ruthlessly killed. However, just as they were about to intervene, they all paused and exclaimed in surprise. Their expressions were indescribably strange. The disciples had all thought that the 10 saints would intervene before Huang Mu's attack landed. However, Huang Mu's palm had already pressed down, yet the saints were still standing there unmoving. It was as if they were stone statues. Why are they not intervening? Why are they watching Ling Han get killed just like this? How can this be? The attack of a saint was naturally devastating. The surroundings were flooded with plumes of dust and earth, though they were rapidly dissipating and settling down. Pooh! The disciples all spluttered in unison when they saw a figure walking out from amid the plumes of dust and earth. Their jaws dropped open and their eyes bulged out. It was as if they had been turned into stone. That was Ling Han, perfectly fine and unscathed. An eternal river tier elite, one at the low extreme, no less, had actually withstood an attack from a saint, even though this was only a casual attack. This was definitely the most absurd thing in the world. This was completely unfathomable. There was definitely something wrong with the heavens. Holy fucking God. Chapter 1534. Hold it right there. 1534. Hold it right there. Who could have imagined that Ling Han would be able to withstand the attack of a saint? This was completely unfathomable. In fact, the disciples were unable to digest this, even though they had witnessed it with their very own eyes. Huang Mu also widened his eyes in shock. He was unable to believe what he saw. What the fuck? Holy motherfucker. Have I been cursed or something, causing the power of my attack to drop considerably? Otherwise, how could an Eternal River Tier elite have blocked my attack? This doesn't make sense. This doesn't make any sense at all. There was a period of deathly silence before a chorus of deafening cheers suddenly erupted. This was incredibly uplifting. Although they had felt refreshed when hearing Ling Han and the large black dog ridicule Huang Mu just then, they had all been aware that doing so was merely a cheap shot of no significance. In the end, what was truly important was still strength. Thus, they had all yearned for there to be a hero, one who could make Huang Mu swallow his own words, and one who could show Huang Mu the might and glory of the Star San Martial Arts Academy. However, they had also known that this was merely a daydream. Even the 9 saints couldn't withstand a single strike of his. So who else would possess the power to battle against him? After all, they couldn't rely on the Star Sand Saint to step forward, could they? Even if he won, what would it actually prove? It was only natural that a great saint would possess a crushing advantage over a small saint. However, just as they were about to fall into despair, a true hero had suddenly stepped forward. Moreover, he had truly managed to block Huang Mu's strike. In fact, he had walked away from it and scathed. Senior Brotherling. Senior Brotherling. Senior Brotherling. The cheers were deafening, and even the senior disciples started to call Ling Han their senior brother. Fuck, he was someone who could withstand a strike from a saint. As such, would they feel any embarrassment in calling him senior brother? If they didn't call him senior brother now, they might not even be able to make friends or claim ties with him in the future. It was almost a given that Ling Han would become a saint in the future. In any case, who would believe it if someone claimed otherwise? Long Xiangyue's eyes lit up, and there was a look of adoration on her face. This man had once asked for her dragon horn. That was an expression of love. Meanwhile, second in the world clicked his tongue in wonder as he quietly mumbled the word freak. His physique was also extremely sturdy, yet Ling Han was already on a whole other level. Zi Chunfeng Hongma and the others also shook their heads and sighed in wonderment. The gulf between them and Ling Han had seemingly grown to an insurmountable level already. Of everyone present, only Ling Han, Empress Luanxing, and a few others knew that Ling Han hadn't blocked Huang Mu's attack with his own strength, but rather had relied on the might of the indestructible heaven scroll to withstand the attack of the saint. In fact, he had already possessed the ability to withstand one full power strike of a saint when he was at the heavenly body tier. Now that his cultivation had risen explosively, it was only natural that he could withstand a few more strikes. It was because of this that he had challenged Huang Mu to a battle of 3 strikes. Of course, this was a very conservative number. He could definitely withstand 3 strikes. Apologize. Fuck off. The disciples suddenly started to heckle Huang Mu, their expressions fervent and their shouts bordering on wild. This is far too fucking uplifting. This is far too fucking soothing. What saint? Piece of absolute dog *T. Fuck off. The jeers were like roaring waves, and they were like collapsing mountains. After all, there were also many big shots among the disciples. These were prodigies who had reached the consummate level of the Eternal River tier. With several thousand disciples present, their combined voice and presence were naturally vast and mighty. There was a dark expression on Huang Mu's face. This result had far exceeded his expectations, and it was more so a huge slap to his face. However, apologizing to these people. Was this possible? He was an elite from the Forbidden Lands, so how could he raise his head in the future if the others learned that he had apologized to ants in the past? There are 2 more strikes, he said. Everyone's jaw dropped upon hearing this. They couldn't believe what they were hearing. Are you really a fucking saint? Can you be any more fucking shameless? You're legitimately going to attack 3 times. What kind of fucking saint are you? Utter trash. The disciples all booed and jeered. In fact, They could barely contain their urge to stick their middle fingers in Huingmu's face. Huingmu acted as if he couldn't hear them. Compared to the scorn from these ants, he more so didn't want to apologize to them in public. In any case, it was Ling Han who had asked for him to launch 3 strikes anyway. Without waiting for Ling Han's agreement, he directly raised his palm. He was serious this time, and there was divine light flickering in his eyes. At the same time, a silver river materialized behind his back. This silver river was filled with dazzling stars, so many that they were uncountable at a glance. Upon seeing this, Ling Han also unleashed his own silver river. He was purposefully doing this to compare their silver rivers. 99 heavenly bodies. The stark contrast between the might of their silver rivers was truly astounding. Moreover, since they had unleashed their silver rivers, it would be impossible for them to hide their cultivation level. Boom! Huingmu lashed out again, his heavenly bodies radiating with brilliance as his palm struck down. An overwhelming pressure crushed the surroundings. Ling Han didn't have the time to even dodge this strike. Saints were far too quick in their attack. In fact, this attack had been so quick that even his divine sense hadn't been able to follow it. Pum! The devastating palm strike once again sent plumes of dust and earth into the air. The disciples all had their hearts in their mouths. Although Ling Han had blocked the strike just then, Huingmu definitely hadn't been attacking with his full strength. The dust cleared, revealing a figure who was still standing upright and proud. Ling Han. Senior brother Ling. Ling Han. The disciples faltered for a moment before roaring in fervent excitement again. Their voices were 100 times louder and more fervent than before. They were far too excited. If Huingmu could have still peddled the excuse of not having tried just then the result of this strike had truly rendered this excuse void. He had already gathered power for half a day to launch his attack, so could he still be shameless enough to whine and make excuses? There was a bright glimmer in the eyes of the Star Sand Saint and his 9 disciples. They could say with 100% certainty that Ling Han had genuinely withstood both of these attacks with his own abilities. He hadn't relied on some precious armor or precious robe. This young man was incredible. Meanwhile, Huingmu wore a look of shock and disbelief. Why hasn't he died yet? He's only at the Eternal River tier, so why is he so difficult to kill? Ling Han smiled faintly and said, "There's still 1 more strike left. Are you going to use it or not? If not, then retract your statements, apologize, and then piss off." Huingmu was boiling with rage, and he truly wanted to kill Ling Han. He refused to believe that an Eternal River tier elite truly possessed the ability to withstand his attacks. Ling Han had definitely practiced some mysterious technique that would allow him to possess a power that rivaled him for a short period of time. What kind of cultivation technique is this? It's far too impressive. He nodded in his mind. He definitely had to obtain this cultivation technique. Even in the celestial realm, such a cultivation technique would still most likely be considered a paramount secret technique. Perhaps it was something that only celestial kings could practice. I'll return and request an ancestor to come and suppress this great saint. I'll then capture Ling Han and force the cultivation technique from him. I admit defeat, he said. He then turned around to leave. Where's the apology? The students shouted. They were extremely unhappy with his attitude. Hadn't he been all arrogant and haughty just then? Why was he cowering now? Huingmu flicked his sleeves in annoyance. What? Were these people going to threaten him or something? Humph! A saintly might radiated from the Star Sand Saint's body, and he said, "The most important quality of cultivators is trust and honor. If you go back on your promise, I'll make sure to kill you on the spot." Huingmu's expression involuntarily changed. He could indeed rival the power of this great saint for a short period of time. However, he could only withstand 100 or so of his attacks. This was the limit of the divine patterns on his precious robe. After that, he would revert to being a small saint who was only slightly more powerful than ordinary small saints. Thus, what right did he have to argue with a great saint? Moreover, upon seeing the look of resoluteness on the Star Sand Saint's face, he was certain that this great saint wasn't joking around with him. Wise men didn't fight against the odds. Huangmu hesitated for a moment before saying, "I retract my previous statements and apologize." The disciples instantly whooped in joy upon hearing this. Just how arrogant had Huangmu been just then? Yet he was being forced to obediently apologize now. This was the might of the Star Sand Saint. This was the might of Ling Han. Huangmu turned around in bitter resentment and was just about to leave. "Hold it right there," Ling Han said as he dashed before Huangmu. There was raging, killing intent in his eyes, and he said, "You were apologizing for your ignorance just then. Now, however, I want to settle another score with you. You actually dared to target my wife. Toward people like you, I have a habit of killing them without mercy." Pooh! Everyone was transfixed with shock upon hearing this. Many people couldn't help but splutter in astonishment. What? Am I hearing things? Is there something wrong with my ears? Chapter 1535, I Want to Kill the Sane. Chapter 1535, I Want to Kill the Sane. Ling Han actually said he wanted to kill Huangmu. He had to be joking. True, Ling Han was indeed very strong, and had even reached a nature-defying extent. He had taken 2 attacks from a saint forcefully, but even so, not one person believed that Ling Han truly was qualified to stand against a saint. That was completely unreal. Otherwise, why had you come to the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy? Who would be worthy of teaching you? When Ling Han had entered the 8th campus, if it hadn't been for Rin Feiyun stepping out to save him, he would probably have been forced to crawl through the dog's hole. How could he possibly have the abilities to match a saint? Everyone shook their heads and thought that Ling Han had lost his own measure in his pride. Senior brotherling, forget it. Since this stray dog has already admitted defeat, we will just be generous and spare him just this once. That's right, senior brotherling. There is no need to drop down to his level. In any case, whatever he says is nonsense. All the students advised and deliberately disparaged Huangmu, so Ling Han would cool his temper. Yet Huangmu had exploded in fury. He was really like a tiger that had gone down to level land. Even these damn little bugs dared to ridicule him? These idiots had completely no idea that he had already sent out news, and in a short few days the ancestor from his clan would reach this place. By that time, wouldn't that so-called great saint only be suppressed? He turned around menacingly. "Brat, you really want to fight me?" He did not mind taking Ling Han down first. In that way, the secret technique of the Celestial King would definitely belong to him alone. He was sure that Ling Han had definitely cultivated a Celestial King technique. Otherwise, he could not possibly have such frightening defenses in the face of such a secret technique. So what if he was one of his own clansmen? Even if he had his own descendants in future, it could not be passed down as easily as that. This was too precious. "Old man, you are too shameless." That's right, a respected saint would actually challenge an eternal river tear. "Why don't you just die?" Everyone laughed mockingly. They did not want Ling Han to accept the challenge at all. "Ling Han, enough," the Star Sand Saint said as well. At present, he was filled with a strong desire to preserve talent. No matter what sacrifices had to be made, he was determined to protect Ling Han. As long as this boy managed to become a saint, he would possess the strength that could allow him to conquer the whole world. Ling Han did not say anything, and instead began to channel that drop of blood essence from the Saint King. Huangmu actually dared to have ideas about the Empress. He could not tolerate that. If the Star Sand Saint had killed Huangmu, he naturally would not have stepped out aggressively, but it was apparent that the Star Sand Saint was wary. Then he'd just do it himself. Boom! Saintly might filled Ling Han's body. This was a drop of blood essence from a Saint King deliberately left behind by the Heavenly River King. It had lasted through eons and could allow Ling Han to explode once. He could even become a match for a great saint. It would be enough to kill a small saint. What? Everyone was stunned. This was saintly might. It could not be more obvious. Golden light entwined around Ling Han's body, becoming multiple seals of great Tao. It was sacred, highest, as if the heavenly Tao itself had arrived. This was the saintly might of a Saint King taking form. Pa, 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 pa. All the common people knelt, and even those rank 3 king tiers like the second in the world and Zeech and Feng were not exempted, either. There was nothing that could be done. This was the might of a Saint King that stood above all. Those that could still remain standing were only those saints. Besides them, there was also the Empress, the Heavenly Phoenix, Divine Maiden, and the large black dog. You have obtained the blood essence of a Saint King, and it is a complete drop, too. Huang Mu paled in shock. This was the first time that he could feel how true the threat this man posed to him was. Ling Han's eyes were menacing. He did not say anything. This was merely a man that was about to die. You want to kill me in your dreams. Huang Mu could only answer his own question. Our 8 stones forbidden land is strongest in prediction. Even if you flee to the corners of the world, your only fate will still be death. This was an indirect admission of his fear. Don't even think of killing me. Otherwise, you will not be able to escape either. This was what he was saying between the lines. A thought flashed in Ling Han's mind. At the time, Huken and his group had actually managed to so coincidentally find them out because they had obtained guidance from the ancestor of their clan who had gained the information through prediction. But this ability of prediction obviously was still very inadequate. Otherwise, Huken and his group would not have died. This kind of ability could not be underestimated, but it was also definitely not omnipotent either. Ling Han, think before you act. The Star Sand Saint did not advise him further, and merely reminded him. The present Ling Han was too strong. He could even equal him in power. Ling Han nodded and said, I have considered carefully. I am determined to stomp this damn bug to death. Fuck. Huang Mu cursed internally, but did not dare to say a word. Instead, he turned around and fled. The man had channeled a drop of blood essence from a Saint King, and his present abilities were enough to equal a great saint. How was he supposed to fight that? The precious robe he was wearing could only endure over 100 attacks, and would crumble after this limit was reached. Want to flee? Ling Han smirked. Since he had even used the blood essence of a Saint King, how could he easily allow him to flee? He moved, and his hand was large enough to shadow the skies, grabbing out towards Huang Mu. At this moment, Ling Han himself was a great saint. When a great saint moved, a small saint could not possibly dodge, and could only take the attack up front. It was just like how Ling Han could not possibly dodge Huang Mu's attack previously. Boom, the precious robe glowed, and divine patterns shone brilliantly. This meant it had exploded with great might, and forcibly blocked Ling Han's attack. Ling Han naturally did not take it to heart. Though there was a time limit to the blood essence of a Saint King, it was definitely enough time for him to send out not just 100 attacks. In other words, Huang Mu was dead. To dare make a move to snatch his wife, who would be dying if not him. Boom, boom, boom. Ling Han thrashed Huang Mu so madly that he could only be beaten. Everyone was watching open-mouthed with shock, and recalled something that they had overlooked. In truth, Ling Han had no need to have the agreement of a single move with the other party, and could completely make a direct move to cripple him. Why had Ling Han taken such an indirect course, then? That was because Ling Han wanted Huang Mu to lower his head and apologize. Otherwise, for someone as proud as Huang Mu, even if he was killed by Ling Han, how could he possibly open his mouth and admit his fault? This was working off his anger. first making you apologize and then killing you. Senior brotherling is formidable. Senior brotherling is imperious. Senior brotherling, I want to have your babies. Everyone's cries resounded together. A great many female disciples had forgotten to be reserved, and even Long Shengyue very much wanted to shout as well. Ling Han moved continuously. With the support of the blood essence of a saint king, his power had reached an unimaginable level. His grasp of technique had not improved, but when power had reached a certain extent, that would naturally form suppression. Moreover, the blood essence of the Saint King also possessed the regulations on the level of Saint King. Though Ling Han could not understand or freely control it, he could only blast it out in one attack after another. This could not be used for comprehension, but could be used in battle. Hu Yingmu's condition began to worsen. His precious robes were seriously consumed underneath the endless attacks. One after another, seals darkened and cracks began to appear. He gritted his teeth. Since his opponent had even used the blood essence of Saint King, he was obviously determined to kill him, so there was no point to even beg for mercy, and he, too, could not possibly beg for mercy from an ant. He still had that much amount of a backbone in him. He was not resigned to this. He was an honorable saint. Furthermore, he was one who had walked out from the forbidden land. Yet he would actually be killed by a junior in the eternal river tier. Even if he was dead, this would mean eternal humiliation, and his name would be infamous in history. He tried his best to break out of the siege. Chapter 1536. He really killed him. Chapter 1536. He really killed him. Too bad. No matter how strong a small saint was, in front of a great saint, he was still just a small saint. Hu Yingmu had not been gifted the blood essence of a Saint King. For a Saint King, this was also a massive loss and would damage his life force. But he himself was a saint and also had a precious robe that could dispel the attacks of even a great saint. In his eyes, it was enough to allow him to do as he liked in the immortal realm. However, he encountered a rash fool who clearly knew how shocking his background was, yet was still determined to hold on to him. There was no need for this, right? Hu Yingmu used all his effort to break through the siege, but in front of the present Ling Han, this was a completely impossible feat. The moment he rushed out, he would be smacked back by a massive hand that shadowed the skies. All his effort only ended up in him being dizzy. All the students watched with their hair on ends. This was planning to kill a saint. A saint was noble and highly revered. Even an elite like the Star Sand Saint did not dare to easily suppress the other small saints, because there was not much difference in the speed of saints. If one party was clearly trying to flee, the other party could only chase futilely from behind. The present situation was different. Hu asked Hu Yingmu to barge in on his own accord. This was equivalent to delivering himself up on a silver platter. If he still managed to flee like that, what justice would be left in this world? Didn't that mean that the Star Sand Saint could only watch on helplessly as any small saint came here and ran berserk? What a joke! Thus, at least in these 100 million years, it had never been heard that a saint had been killed. There were those that died of old age, but there was not one that had died in battle. But now, this exciting scene was about to play out. Killing a saint, and the one who would be killing a saint was an eternal river tier. Heavens! Hu Yingmu had gone crazy. He did not hold back from burning his own life force. Otherwise, he would definitely be dead. By this time, even if he did not want to, he had to put his life on the line. But so what if a small saint burned his own life force? He was still incapable of matching the battle prowess of a great saint. "Ah!" he cried out, having an arm forcefully ripped off. "Ugh!" he groaned as a large hole appeared in his chest. Hiss! He frowned as his back suffered a palm strike. Even his heart had been crushed. Even so, he could still fight. The vitality of a saint was sturdy. In fact, there was not much effect on his battle prowess. When one had reached the height he had reached, what was important was using the regulations of heaven and earth. As long as his spirit was not destroyed, it could be claimed that his battle prowess would be maintained at prime condition. However, a spirit was established on a physical body. Without a physical shell, a spirit would only be a weed that had lost its roots. Thus, as long as Huingmu's physical body was destroyed, his spirit would be exposed. By then it would be too easy to kill him. But right at this moment, Ling Han's aura suddenly declined. Huingmu was first stunned, then became overjoyed. The blood essence of a saint king in Ling Han was about to be fully consumed. He only had to last for a while longer, and would be able to survive this crisis. Ha ha ha! He laughed madly. A mere eternal river tear, and you still want to kill a saint? That would only happen in your dreams. This was what a saint was. Even if Ling Han possessed a drop of blood essence of a saint king, he would not be able to kill a saint, either. It was too difficult. Is that so? Ling Han smirked coldly and drew the divine demon sword. Pooh! He stabbed it into Huingmu's body. The basis of your confidence is only a drop of Saint King blood essence. Once the saintly blood is consumed, you are nothing in front of me. Huingmu scoffed. An ant will always be an ant. Even if you wear an imperial robe, you will still be a piece of trash. You. He suddenly paled in shock. A frightening, murderous aura was bubbling inside his body and instantly destroyed his life force completely. Why was it like this? He hurriedly had his spirit leave his body. Even if he had to discard this body, he would not hold back. At least he could secure his life. As long as his spirit was still present, he could still make a comeback. However, it was too late. The divine demon's sword had been forged from divine metal, and having this kind of powerful weapon stab into his body, especially into a vital point, would definitely mean death. Huingmu's spirit had indeed left his body, but the murderous aura had already infected his spirit. It was endlessly eroding his spirit as if it was being weathered away. In an instant it degenerated. No! A sharp howl rang out from his spirit and echoed in everyone's mind. This was only a short instant. Huingmu's spirit had disappeared, and he was completely dead. A saint had thus vanished. Kwang! A sudden clap of thunder sounded in the skies, and a shower of blood rained down. A saint had died, and gave rise to a lament from the heavens. From a certain aspect, a saint represented the heaven and earth. When a saint died, the heaven and earth would grieve. Everyone was dumbfounded. He had really killed a saint. Something that definitely was impossible to happen had really, truly happened. Heavens! This definitely was the largest miracle in history. An eternal river tier had killed a saint, and he wasn't even in the pinnacle level of the eternal river tier. That was a level that theoretically couldn't manage to kill a saint. After persisting for 30 minutes, the rain of blood finally stopped. The dark clouds dispersed, and the thunder stopped. Everything returned to normal. Ling Han turned around and walked back. The divine light on his body had already weakened greatly, but the eyes everyone looked at him with were still filled with reverence. Follow me. The star sand saint curled out a hand and brought Ling Han back to the ancient academy. He did not even call the 9 small saints with him. Zhu Xiaoer was surprised, fearful, and filled with hatred simultaneously. This naturally scared her to death, but the Star Sand Saint had completely ignored her bitter experience, which made her extremely furious. I am your wife here, your son's mother. Ling Han and the Star Sand Saint conversed secretly for close to a day, and only then did he return. He immediately called his 2 wives over and made his preparations to leave the Wood Figure Planet. On this day, he asked the Star Sand Saint a great many questions, especially concerning the field of prediction. He found out that when one had entered Saint King level, elites truly would possess that kind of ability. However, it was very vague, and only those Saint Kings that were focused on studying this area could become highly accurate. Unfortunately, that ancestor from the 8 Stones Forbidden Land should be that kind of Saint King. Huingmu had died, and in a few days this ancestor would charge over here. Thus, Ling Han had to leave, and the Star San Martial Arts Academy would also put up an act and order the arrest of Ling Han. It was not just the myriad directions galaxy that he could not stay, he could not even go to the surrounding galaxies. The prediction of a Saint King was not omnipotent. The nearer he was, the more accurate the prediction would be, and the farther he was, the more vague it would be. He had to immediately leave. Saints could travel through tearing a rip into space, and were even faster than the cloud-piercing shuttle. If he didn't leave now, it would be too late. Ling Han asked the opinions of the Rain Emperor and the others. They all expressed the wish to remain. There were many king tiers here, and competing with them could allow them to advance their cultivation level at a faster pace. Ling Han left behind a large number of leaves from the reincarnation tree, as well as a great many top-grade god tools and saintly material which he allowed the Rain Emperor and the others to freely choose from. He did all that he could. Everyone possessed top-grade cultivation techniques and top-grade materials, and were also nurtured by the resources from the academy. If they still did manage to reach the apex with all this, there was nothing else Ling Han could say. After doing all this, Ling Han, the Empress, and the heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden set out. There was not a minute to lose. On the 4th day after Ling Han left, a golden path suddenly descended from the skies and landed on the wood figure planet. Then, a frightening saintly might surged out, causing everyone to feel a tremor radiate from the depths of their hearts. "Are you still not coming out to see me?" A voice rang out. An elder appeared, his saintly might rolling out as if he was the master of this heaven and earth. Chapter 1537, The Hunt Begins. Chapter 1537, The Hunt Begins. The Star San Saint appeared at the first moment, and the instant he saw the visitor, he looked shocked. This was a supreme elite, the air of primal chaos entwined all over his body. Even he could not clearly distinguish his features, and could only judge by his voice that this man should be very, very old. And beside this man, there was another young man who similarly was a saint. However, he was too young. At most, he couldn't be more than 100,000 years old. In fact, it was possible that he was only 10,000 to 20,000 years old. The Star San Saint was incredibly surprised. A saint who was only 10,000 to 20,000 years old. Even if he was a prodigy, these 10,000 to 20,000 years would only be enough for him to attain the Sun-Moon tier, right? But the person in front of him was a saint. Though he was only supposed to be a Sun-Moon tier, he had already reached the most crucial step into the saint tier. "Greetings, Senior." The Star San Saint bowed towards that supreme elite. This indeed was a Saint King, an existence that even he could only look up to. This elite was an ancestor of the Hu clan, a truly mighty figure, and a being that was on the level of the master of the whole immortal realm. His name was Huluo, and had reached Tao 30 billion years ago. Though he had lived for so many years, he could still live on for another 10 billion years or so, and could see who knew how many elites being replaced by newer generations. Saint King Huluo glanced at the Star San Saint. His expression could not be seen, but a person that had come out from a forbidden land had to be incredibly prideful. What more when he was a Saint King, a truly invincible existence in the entire immortal realm. He did not speak, and instead turned to look at the young man beside him. This young saint broke into a smile, as warm as a spring breeze, but he radiated a bone-deep coldness that was like ice. That was a kind of pride that was not apparent from the surface. In truth, this kind of person was truly the most arrogant. Their condescension of others was bone-deep. "I am Hu Feng," he introduced himself. "How should I address you, sir?" "Mi Yuan," the Star San Saint replied. If this was another setting, he naturally did not have to bother with a small saint, but now this small saint was the representative of a Saint King. He had to be polite. "Lord Mi." Hu Feng bowed again, and then said, "Recently a senior from my clan has disappeared. Going by the prediction of my clan ancestor, this grandfather of mine should have died here. Does Lord me know who was his murderer? The Star Sand Saint couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. Though Hu Feng had been polite, every word was sharp. He was asking him if he was the murderer. Wasn't that very obvious? In this place, there was no other great saint besides you. So who else could kill a small saint? Thankfully, the Star Sand Saint had prepared himself and replied, Indeed, I do know. This person's name is Ling Han. Oh, please clearly talk about the background of this man, Hu Feng said calmly, but a sliver of killing intent was already seeping from his eyes. This person was originally a student of my academy and had just broken through to the Eternal River Tier recently. Lord me, don't tell me that that grandfather of mine has been killed by an Eternal River Tier. Hu Feng interrupted his words, a mocking smile appearing on his face. Even if you wanted to lie, you had to make up a believable excuse, right? An Eternal River Tier killing a saint. Why weren't you claiming that pigs could fly while you were at it? The Star Sand Saint continued. That is indeed the case, because Ling Han possessed a drop of Saint King blood essence. He also related the matter of the 3 Phoenix Kings pulling a war chariot. This was the agreement that had been reached after his discussion with Ling Han, because Ling Han was sure that this would cause the 8 Stones Forbidden Land to overlook the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy and concentrate all their attention on him. Hu Feng was about to continue saying something when Saint King Hu Feng suddenly waved a hand. The air of primal chaos on his face even dispersed a little, and he said, That chariot, as well as those 3 Phoenix Kings. Talk in further detail about them. Though he had restrained himself very much, the urgency in his tone could still be heard. Hu Feng was surprised, but he immediately recalled something. Suddenly he too became excited. The Star Sand Saint hid nothing, and explained the whole matter. Hu Luo's hands formed a strange divine seal. Streaks of divine light glimmered, and multiple seals appeared behind him. His whole person had become abstract. He was clearly standing there, yet it seemed as if he did not exist at all, which was incredibly bizarre. The Star Sand Saint knew that this was the other merging with the great Tao of the heaven and earth. He was making a prediction. After a while, Saint King Hu Luo finally stopped. The air of primal chaos on his face lessened considerably, and an aged face could be seen. In fact, there were even a few drops of sweat. He nodded at Hu Feng and said, The matter should be more or less like that. You must immediately set out and hunt down this despicable boy. He transmitted the message through divine sense, so only Hu Feng could hear it. The treasure left behind by the Heavenly River King has serious implications. If I left the Forbidden Land for too long, it would definitely draw the suspicion of the other Forbidden Lands. Hence, I will delegate this matter to you. Yes, ancestor. Hu Feng respectfully obeyed. Saint King Hu Luo bore a deep fondness for this junior. This was the future hope of the Hu clan. He had entered into the Saint tier after merely cultivating for 13,000 years, which was the first in the history of the Hu clan. Thus, it was inevitable that he would be a little bit long-winded. This boy killed Ingmu, and has thus established a relation of karma with our Hu clan. With your abilities, it would not be difficult for you to predict the other's whereabouts. I will gift you a drop of blood essence as well, just in case. Hu Luo condensed a drop of Saint King blood essence and handed it to Hu Feng. For him, this was also an extremely great loss. He had to immediately return to the Forbidden Land to rest. Otherwise, it would affect his lifespan. Furthermore, he was about to experience the immortal tribulation soon. If he was not in his prime condition, it was highly possible that he could be severed by the heaven and earth. If it was not due to the fact that the treasure trove of the Heavenly River King was too important, he naturally would not undergo such a massive loss. Unfortunately, he could not personally commence pursuit. What if that drew the suspicion of the other Forbidden Lands? Then it was possible that the 8 Stones Forbidden Land would be like how the Heavenly River King had been, and become the target of their combined forces. I understand. Hu Feng nodded. He 2 formed a seal to predict, and soon focused his gaze on one corner of the galaxy. Suddenly, a golden path stretched out beneath his feet. In merely a single step, he had already traveled a boundless distance. Saint King Huluo looked at the Star Sand Saint and calmly stated, "Your disciple killed my clansman. What do you think should be done?" This meant that he was asking for compensation. The Star Sand Saint hurriedly answered, "This junior is willing to make up for it." Saint King Huluo nodded. He would only stay for 1 to 2 days, and would then have to return to the Forbidden Land. He was not the only person that knew how to make a prediction. If he stayed outside for too long, and another person decided to make a prediction on a whim, that kind of result was something he could not accept. His eyes focused on the galaxy and revealed a strong hint of anticipation. He was filled with confidence in Hufeng. This junior would definitely settle the matter well. Ling Han steered the cloud-piercing shuttle, traveling through the galaxy and aiming straight for the cloud apex planet. But after a mere 2 days, a golden pathway stretched over from the depths of the universe and quickly surpassed the cloud-piercing shuttle. A figure flashed, and a young man had already appeared on the golden pathway, blocking the course of the cloud-piercing shuttle. "Please stop for a moment. I would like to ask some questions." This young man wore a warm smile as if he was greeting an old friend. Chapter 1538, A Torrent of Abuse. Chapter 1538, A Torrent of Abuse. This was very strange. In the desolate and cold galaxy, a man stood in your path and hailed you down for a chat like he was your next-door neighbor. But this was the galaxy here. A saint from the Hu clan, Ling Han immediately confirmed internally. Aside from this forbidden land that was expert in prediction, he did not offend any other saints. If it was claimed that it just coincidentally happened to be some other saint that had stopped him in his path on a paltry whim, he truly would not believe that. He exited the cloud-piercing shuttle and put the cloud-piercing shuttle away into the black tower with a wave of his right hand. Then he looked at that young man. This man was really frighteningly young. His brimming vitality could not be faked. He was filled with youthful energy that seemed like it could tear a hole into the skies. "From the 8 Stones, Forbidden Land?" Ling Han asked. Since he had come to hunt him down, there was naturally no need for him to be polite. He very much despised this kind of hypocritical and murderous character. This young man naturally was Hufeng. He was still smiling. With the lofty position of a saint, especially one that had walked out from a forbidden land, he naturally would not take to heart the resistance of a mere ant. However world-shakingly you were cursing, what person would take the mad chirping of a bird outside his window seriously? He broke into a smile and said, "Since you know that I have come from the 8 Stones Forbidden Land, you must be the one I am looking for." He paused and continued, "My name is Hufeng. You may address me directly by my name." This was really humility to a certain extent. A high and noble saint actually allowed an eternal river-tear to address him directly by name. Just how amiable was he? It was too deliberate. What a fake! Ling Han shook his head internally. If the large black dog was here, he definitely would have innumerable negative and derisive words to spout. Too bad. This damn dog was glad to be in his proper surroundings in the academy, and simply did not leave with him. Of course, Ling Han did not want to bring it along, either. Wasn't that just looking for his own discomfort? Ling Han smiled as well and said, "My name is Ling Han. You, too, can address me directly by name." When Hufeng heard this, a muscle involuntarily twitched in his cheek. He was a saint, and if he allowed others to address him directly, that was him being humble and amiable. But even an eternal river-tear, like you dared act like that? Fuck. I gave you an inch, and you planned to take a mile. His tone darkened as he said, "You killed a member of our Hu clan, and you think you can flee?" Ling Han smiled instead and said, I will try my best and will absolutely not disappoint your expectations. Hu Feng felt another muscle twitch in his cheek again. Those words from him were naturally filled with sarcasm, yet Ling Han actually answered him directly. You think I hope that you can flee? Then, what kind of trash would a saint like me be, not being capable of apprehending even an eternal river tear? He was only wary that Ling Han still possessed the Saint King blood essence, though he was sure that the latter should only have a single drop, and had already used it. It was best to be sure. He was a very careful person. There was no rush to make a move. Without the Saint King blood essence, where could he flee to? Just use whatever tricks you have, Hu Feng stated calmly. Ling Han had very sharp senses, and added with the fact that he had spent a long period of time with such great caustic characters like the large black dog, the old ginseng, and the rabbit, he was expertly skilled at grasping the hearts of others. He laughed and said, Though you put on a very amiable act, you are actually testing out the waters to see if I still have any Saint King blood essence. If I didn't, you would probably immediately turn hostile, right? He had hit the nail on the head. Hu Feng's expression did not change. He still had that level of subtlety in him. Though he had been cultivating in the last millennia and more, he was naturally extremely intelligent and very strong in self-discipline to be able to advance into the saint tier so quickly. He chuckled and replied, You are but a mere eternal river tear. What right do you have to act insolent in front of me? Tisk, TSK. Ling Han shook his head. If I have to be honest, you are simply cheap. Your own clan senior has been killed by my hand, and you fuck asterisk still act so friendly. Fuck, I have never seen trash like you. If you had been my grandson, I would have broken your wretched leg a long time ago. This. Hu Feng was dumbfounded. This, and actually dared to hurl abuse at him. Cheap? Trash? Wretched leg? No matter how well he could act, he would not be able to tolerate that. If he could still bear having someone point directly at his nose and throw insults at him, wouldn't he be a tortoise? How dare you? Finally, he could not hold back from moving. Even his expression was slightly twisted in livid fury. If anyone from the 8 Stones Forbidden Land was here, they definitely would be filled with disbelief. That was because Hu Feng had lacked youthful temper since childhood and had been called an immovable boulder. Even if the heavens collapsed in front of him, his expression would not change. When they had been playing when they were children, even if someone had snatched his toy away, he would not even cry or make a fuss. But now, even the boulder had been angered and lost all his composure. This was practically unimaginable. As the saying goes, one would be the product of his environment. Who were those beside Ling Han? They were beings like the large black dog, the old ginseng, and the rabbit if one stayed long enough with them. And they were really intent on angering you. They definitely were capable of driving you to mad fury. Ling Han had already channeled the indestructible Heaven Scroll. Boom! When this strike landed, he was sent flying thousands of miles away. The galaxy did not form any kind of resistance for him. If he had not taken the initiative to stop, he could continue to fly all the way, and would only stop when he crashed into some meteor or star. Hu Feng was involuntarily stunned. This man actually managed to endure a blow from him. This was nature-defying. The Star Sand Saint had only said that Ling Han killed Huingmu by channeling a drop of Star Sand Saint King blood essence, and concealed that wager that had been previously made. Thus, neither Hu Feng nor Huingmu knew what terrifying height Ling Han's defenses could attain. This definitely was not the might of a tool, but the ability of this person himself. What kind of cultivation technique was this? Hu Feng's eyes abruptly lit up. As the prodigy of a forbidden land, he naturally knew a great turmoil had 8 Stones tribe leaving the celestial realm. But in comparison, the 8 Stones tribe could not be considered as top tier among those forces that had been exiled. It was said that there were even celestial kings that had died in that kind of war. The Heavenly River King had obtained this kind of inheritance, and that was why he managed to rise up in such a short period of time and became able to challenge the Forbidden Lands. This Brad had to have obtained the treasures that the Heavenly River King had left behind. In fact, he had already successfully cultivated the techniques from within. Otherwise, how could he possibly be capable of blocking the blow from a saint? Immediately his greed blazed. He made another move and grabbed out at Ling Han. Ling Han could not dodge and could only channel the indestructible Heaven's scroll to endure another strike. Boom! Golden light emanated from his whole body, and he was like an undefeatable war god. He again successfully blocked this blow. He gritted his teeth internally. This Hufeng was even more powerful than Huingmu. He had only suffered 2 blows, and the origin power inside his body was already completely exhausted. He laughed loudly. What 8 stones forbidden land? What damn saint you can only do so much? Little Feng, I'm not going to stay around to play with you. Next time, I will come again to teach you a lesson. As he said this, he directly entered into the Black Tower. The moment he entered into the Black Tower, he flopped onto the ground, gasping out in pain. Hu Feng's second strike had still caused him some level of damage, causing even his godly bones to crackle and pop as if they were about to break. Going by the look of things, I may not be able to take a full power blow from a great saint. Ling Han sighed. The so-called strike from a saint was only limited to a medium saint. The heavenly body tier corresponded to a small saint, whereas the eternal river tier corresponded to medium saint. If that kind of complaint was heard by others, they would definitely be strangling him in fury. Fuck, aside from a freak like you, what eternal river tier in this whole world could survive a blow from a saint?